Welcome to the Morning Slice. Hey there, this is your host speaking, Brianna McNerney, and I'm so excited today to bring you our very first guest on the Morning Slice, Mr. Ken Hicks. Now, Ken is a Marine Corps veteran. He is the founder of tech recruiting firm Broadwing, and he is a multi-passionate entrepreneur, a man of many hobbies, and a deeply caring person who really does so much to provide as much as possible for his community. And I admire that about him. Ken and I went to high school together, so we've known each other a really long time, and I can't think of anyone more perfect to be interviewing for the very first episode of the show. So I hope you have as much fun listening to this interview as I had, participating in it and preparing it for you. Ken is the type of guy who will inspire you to want to do more while still fully embracing who you are right now. And I just can't wait to share him with you. So I'll see you on the other side. Hey, Ken, how are you today?
Doing great. Happy closer to the end of the week.
Yay, celebrating. I
Yeah.
thank you so much for being here with us today.
No, thanks. I really appreciate the time, the interest, and the opportunity to talk about a number of topics in a very interesting and challenging time for sure.
To say the least. But first, I would like to start on kind of a surprise light note because you have a truck that you are obsessed with, from what I
Yeah.
can tell, and I want to hear about it.
Yeah.
For your truck, are
Okay.
you working on anything with it right now?
So yeah, no, I Bruce is the name of the truck. Actually, hometown friend. I don't know if you remember the Narrows, but Lizzie, she named Bruce. She came up. I mean, it's just such a great name for a short bed truck. It's a '96 F-150. I found it under a tree in Western Pennsylvania, and I've been searching for an older truck to kind of work on, and so we got Bruce healthy and up and running, and it's interesting. I've had to do a lot of the stuff myself, which I enjoy. I think it's important to have hobbies, and I've always been a car fanatic. So that's something that I've taken a lot of time to do. It's been a little over a year. Look, I'm like talking about Bruce as if like it's a puppy that I've rescued, right? It's been a little over a year, and Bruce is doing a lot better, getting comfortable to the surroundings, you know.
Hey, you love
Um,
him.
but
That's fine.
yeah, yeah, and it's a stick shift. People don't really do that anymore. I love that about it, and but what's funny is I take it to I've tried to take it to a couple of different places for some of like the rust repair,
Mm.
and it's interesting. People will be like these are businesses, and they're like, we won't work on that.
Huh. Why not?
Yeah, they're like, it's more than what I'm interested in doing. It's like I'm offering you money for services, but I'm serious, Pete. Three places have turned Bruce away so far in terms of like fixing some of the rust on the quarter panels, and they're like, we should just get an all new bed, and I'm like, a part of this whole restoration thing and a number of projects with me is like not just throwing things away.
I love that.
Just I don't want to throw the bed away. I don't want to, just because you don't want to do the work, like it's a little bit more than just the truck, but I'm trying to like more in my life be like, how can I keep using this thing? And like it is a vehicle. It just really goes from A to B. I drive it around town, and how can I just keep using it? So yeah, I love the truck. People love the truck. It's so fun. Yeah, I really like it. Takes my mind off of a lot of the craziness and work and life and all that stuff,
I'm glad that you have an outlet like that. And
for
Bruce
sure.
is absolutely beautiful. I don't know if you mentioned that he's green, and I haven't met him personally, but I do enjoy looking at the photos that you share over on it.
I was gonna change the color, and my wife was like, "Don't you dare!" And then like the neighborhood got involved. Like people, my neighbors, they were like, "What are you gonna do with it?" And what's funny is Bruce made an awful noise when I first bought it. The tack was stuck wide open, so it would rev, like it would stay loud. It would just rev really loud. There was no way, unless you were driving on like highway speed, that it was quiet. So when I pulled the truck up, I was like, we're gonna get kicked out of this neighborhood. We don't have an HOA, but they were probably about to make one just to get rid of us. But no, the neighborhood loved it. People came out and they were like, don't ever change that green color. So we're sticking with the green.
I love that. I'm glad that people are rallying for the green color because I also adore it.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing. And you were just telling me before we press record about your new woodworking hobby. You do drink making. I'm like, tell me about all this creativity that's going on in your life, please. Let's start.
Yeah, a lot of this, and like I'll tie it into my general feeling is, especially right now, right? Like you're at a point. I'm in my 30s. You have a lot going on with your career. You've built up some money to like do things, right? And for me, like I just want to live as much as I possibly can. And although things are challenging, from a, yeah, I don't know, we have a lot going on right now in the world. I try to do as much as I can. And mostly because I want my kids to see me do that. I don't want them to see me just go to work every single day and come home and, then just put that on repeat for the next 30 years. I want them to see me enjoying life and doing many different things. And so, the woodworking stuff is kind of tied to the drink stuff, but um, um, basically, creating content in this time, not just this particular moment, but like in your life, we are one of the first generations that we will be able to tell almost our complete story without someone having to write a book or something like that. My kids will, if I do it correctly, my kids will be able to see who my grandkids, my great grandkids, they won't have to ask who I was. They'll have real tangible content to see exactly who I was and what I was about. Written, video, this, right? Like and they'll be able to hear my voice and see the things that I loved and or like to do. And then there'll be the pictures. I think a lot of people see that I share pictures of my kids and a lot of this, and I hope that how much I love them and involve them comes through in all of that. So it's a really unique opportunity. I think not enough people are taking advantage of it. I think because they don't. First, you have to get used to hearing your voice. Then you have to get used to seeing yourself on camera and be pleased with all those things. But yeah, I think people should just make content about the things that they're doing, not because a bunch of people are going to watch it, not because you're going to get like millions of followers on social media platforms, but because you can tell your own story in a way that like our parents used to do through scrapbooks, right? But like, what if I could watch a video of my grandfather right now? He built a lot of foundations for houses in Georgia, and if I could just like listen to him talk about his job and throw in little sprinkles about his, I don't know how many kids. I think my mom was like one of like seven or eight. Like that would be phenomenal. And so hopefully that's a gift that I'm giving to folks later.
Wow.
You
I
know.
love that. I really love that perspective on content creation and the opportunity that's available to all of us today. And of course, I know this is going to happen a million times as we're talking. You've inspired five different questions that I want to branch off onto. But one that was really popping into my mind, it is kind of a slight change of topic, but when it comes to hobbies, this
Mhm.
is a conversation I've heard a lot that people don't have hobbies. And so let me clarify first. It sounds like content creation in itself, you approach kind of like a hobby.
Mhm. Yes, yes. Like diving into it and not and being okay with everything not being perfect. There are some things like I try to improve on when it comes to like my hobbies and get them to a point where I'm really, quite good at it. But with content, I think that what slows people down or why they don't even get into it, right? Like we all have a phone. It's crazy good at at this point, better than cameras. Like we were out there, you remember like we had the
Mhm.
throwaway cameras, like you had to take the to Walmart, get the
Oh, yeah.
film, you know what I mean? Like that whole hustle. And we don't have to do that anymore. You just pick up your phone and just point it at yourself and tell
Mhm.
your story. Um, but I do try to get better and better at these different things, and like even this, right? Like I've done podcasts, I've done public speaking, and even that's like another skill that you just have to get good at. And it's like you wonder what you're building towards, right?
Mhm.
I think a lot of people think about that. They're like, "Oh, well, when will I ever use that?" Like, you don't know.
Mhm.
Like, I used to work in house at a company, and I remember a teammate got up to speak about a program that she was running in front of the whole company, and we were kind of partnering on it. And when she went to speak, she was nervous.
Mhm.
And then in that moment, it kind of struck me like this might be her first time speaking it to or a group of people or anything like that, where or it's like, a couple hundred people, which like could be intimidating.
Mhm.
And then, after I got a chance to grab the microphone, I went through my portion of it, and I had three people approach me afterwards, and and just because the contrast was so great, they were like, "Hey, do you speak like in front of crowds quite a bit?" Like, well, maybe I speak too much for sure. Um, but that it is something I've worked on, and I've taken opportunities to give speeches. I love to get an opportunity. Like right now, my brother is he is dating someone that's very serious,
Okay.
and and I've been thinking, I love my brother so much. I've been thinking about what I would say in a speech to him for years now. But I maybe that's what I'm building towards, right? Like just taking opportunities to speak towards. I want to execute on that so well for him that like I practice those skills, practice in front of mirrors. Not that speech particular. I'm not like running that speech by myself right now, but but you have to practice. And when you're given an opportunity, it's like when someone asks you to dance on the dance floor.
Mhm.
If you say no every single time when you're growing up all the way into your 20s, and by the time you're hitting it at weddings, then it's going to be a little akko taco when you get on that dance floor. You're like, dang, I've been saying no for like 2 decades.
To say the least, yes.
Yeah, you got to say yes, get out on the dance floor.
Oh, I love that. And what I'm hearing is that the way you approach your hobbies, they have this impact both being professionally useful, like obviously public speaking, content creation, that's got to be helping you in your business life. You also are applying them to your personal life in a very real way. I love how you're doing that at the same time.
Yeah, some of them are just nonsense hobbies, right? Like I like to go skiing, and I really like having a beer on top of a mountain, right? Like I don't know who that helps
Right.
other than me, but
I think I know that you are not alone.
yeah.
Who doesn't wanna be up on top of a mountain
Yeah,
having a nice cold beer right
yeah,
now?
yeah. So, I mean, but yeah, a lot of them, I dive in, but I try not to take myself too seriously with them. I know that hobbies can be overwhelming. I don't need anything to be perfect. Sometimes that's a flaw of mine, but and I think maybe people think because I'm prior military and all this stuff, the prior Marine Corps specifically, that I need stuff to be perfect. I really don't. I enjoy having a good time more than having things be perfect.
I love that. And so I wonder if that's kind of how you choose your hobbies, because that was one of my questions. I know a lot of people kind of struggle when they're looking to pick up a hobby because they're not sure what they're even interested in.
Hmm.
And I wonder how you go about choosing what to invest your time in. Is it the fun factor, or are there other things that you think about?
I think I think it's an interesting approach. How do people choose a hobby, right? Like I said, I get invited to do a thing, and I usually say, "Yeah." I don't know, like going for a ski trip when I was younger. Then I was like, "Oh, that's something I kind of know how to do." I wasn't great, but then for the past like 6 years, I've been spending time out in Colorado, getting pretty good at that. But if I hadn't like tried once, right, then maybe I would be like, I don't know, right? So I don't know. I don't. I really, maybe a part of my skill set there is like the willingness to go. and try new things. I'll go try one thing and I'll try it hard that one time. If I hate it, then I'll never do it again, right? But I will go try it, and I think that that's different than searching out a hobby, which I would think is really incredibly hard. To say I have free time of the millions and billions of things I could do on Earth, from fly fishing to pottery, like
Sure.
to try to narrow that down, I
Mhm.
think is really, really hard. And I think that people will eventually probably rely on something from their youth or something like that. But I'm more of the ilk that, whatever it is I'm doing or trying or watching content on, that I'm like, oh, you know what? Like, I should give that a go, versus, seeking out. So whatever, I have friends that I think, they really struggle with the free time aspect,
Yeah.
because there's so much that you could do, right? And there's certain friends I'm like, oh, what do you like to do? Like, what are your hobbies? And they're like, I don't know, I'm still trying to figure that out. I think it's probably a luxury, living although we think things are so bad in our current state, we still have the luxury that we could just spend the spare time, right?
Mhm.
So I think that it's really hard sometimes for people to find what to do with that. I would just say, just go try literally everything. Just like everything that comes across your plate is, someone's like, yo, like, we're having like a drum dance line in the middle of the city. Like, are you interested in that? Like, don't be like, no, like, yeah, just be like, yeah, like, let me go. That's a one-time opportunity. Let's see if it is awesome to
I
me.
love it. So basically, just being open to the opportunities as they present themselves and willing to be bad at things. I'm here,
Oh yeah.
willing to be really bad at things and
Yeah.
continuing on with the things that stick in a
Yeah.
fun way. I love that. I
Yeah.
hope somebody can hear that and find a hobby because I agree that hobbies and fun, it is a luxury. It's a privilege that we have to be able to spend our time in that way. But here at Slice, we also consider fun to be an essential piece of life and creativity and time management, even because when we're not spending time indulging those creative, fun parts of ourselves, life can become such a slog, can it?
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. I you can't. I'm really wary of things that like suck the life out of you, whether it be like, even like my truck, right? Like stuff like machines, homes, yards, other people will just suck the life out of you. If you need things to be perfect, if you dive into too much, so if you're not enjoying it, then you got to get that thing away from you. You know what I mean? Like,
Amen.
yeah.
I hear that. So you mentioned before, for everyone who's listening, that you are a Marine Corps vet.
Correct.
And I would love to hear a little bit more about your background as a Marine and how that informs you today. It seems like a lovely little balance that we're striking here between the Marine Corps life and the fun seeking life. But indulge
Yeah.
us. Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I needed every last bit of the United States Marine Corps. I'm forever thankful for the training, for the opportunity, for the travel, for the experiences, for the friendships and the brotherhood and sisterhood that I'll cherish for the rest of my life. My father was in the Marine Corps, and it's a really special bond that he and I have. We call each other on 10 November every single year, the Marine Corps birthday, and talk and drink too much. And so that's, it's an experience I wouldn't trade for the world. I would say, why did I need it? I needed it. I needed the discipline at a young age, and I needed, structure, and I needed a format. College for a lot of people is really challenging.
Sure.
You don't know exactly where and why and who. Like, you don't know what you're doing But I'll tell you one thing about the Marine Corps: like you don't have to worry about any of that because because you will be
They
told.
will tell
Yeah,
you.
yeah.
Yeah.
Someone is always there to hold your hand and make sure that you are informed about the next step in activity. And like being someone who's I'm really oriented, like if you're like, hey, we just need to like run over there as fast as we can. I love that. Right? I like ran track in high school and
Perfect.
college. Like I love running places. So that was like big part of the job. So yeah, like, oh, we need to run over there. And when we get there, what do we need? Like lift that thing up and put it here. Like, oh, I would love it. It's very basic, right? And um in a lot of ways. There's a lot of complexities. I particularly worked in Abrams tanks, and actually, this past week, tanks were officially retired from the United States Marine Corps. So I'm
Wow.
actually one of the last groups of Marine Corps tankers in the Marine Corps history. Uh, pretty sad, about the tanks going away. But the Marine Corps is supposed to be a very nimble fighting force, so I imagine maybe they thought that that was no longer a part of what modern Marine Corps warfare was about. But it was a very unique experience. So you know, I think what people expect out of Marines, right, is this very finite, disciplined view on the rest of the world. But it couldn't really be further from the truth with Marines is you need to be able to improvise,
Hmm.
go through adversity and make changes on the fly. Now, me, I don't think that at that young age, I think a lot of other men and women that I served with were more mature in the leadership category than I was during that time.
Hmm.
Um, but getting a chance to work with some of them, I think that those are the things that guide me today, is taking all of those examples. Now here's the biggest thing. I think a lot of people carry weight with disappointment from their parents, or things that they did growing up. I would venture to say, I don't like to speak for other people, but I would venture to say that many veterans, period, but specifically Marines, we carry the weight of disappointing our sisters and brothers in
Oh,
arms,
wow.
and especially our leadership. I can think of 7 people right off the bat right now that I wanted to do better for. That I still think about a particular moment where I'm like, I hope I didn't let them down. Um, and I think about, um, I don't know if he'll ever hear this, but he was Corporal Russell at the time. I remember one night we were up working on tanks. It was like, I don't know, 1 or 2 in the morning. I'm fatigued, I'm beat, I'm tired. This guy had all the energy all the time. Didn't matter. 2 a.m., 2 in the afternoon. He was incredible. And I remember he took the time to like pull me aside, and basically he was like mentoring me on why I was tired, which is very Marine Corps, right? To be like, why are you tired right now? And like for that to be a critique, right? That's very Marine Corps to be like, yeah, we don't have time for you to be tired. I was still doing the job, but I wasn't doing it with the energy that I think he knew I had. It was like just like 2 in the morning, and he's still like, nah. Like, and I remember him being like, "Hey, man, I'm a man just like you, and I'm doing this." And I like I didn't want to let him down. I still like carry that weight with me. It was just like a simple, like we're just working on a tank, but Marines, we carry the weight of not disappointing someone. So sometimes, like even now, like I could be like working, I'm like, let me like take 5. I'm like, damn, I don't want to disappoint Corporal Russell. So let me, let me like get some energy right now, because I don't want him to think like I'm lazy, even though I haven't seen that dude in like since 2000, I don't know, 12. I'm still out here trying to like earn the respect of my fellow Marines, and so that really drives me. I've had someone who I cherish, really closely, a friend of mine from the Marine Corps, tell me that he still talks about my performance in the Marine Corps to some of his junior and younger Marines. That means the absolute world to me, that I was able to set a good enough example that somebody who I respect and look up to, his name's Drew Stanton. He's a chief warrant officer now. For him to mention my name in any capacity or any of my past experience to Marines that he works with today, I can't tell you what that means to me. So, how does my Marine Corps background impact me today? It's more about I don't want to let any of those people down. Um, if I were to do anything wrong right now, they would still put, um, former Marine. Let's say, if I were to get it a DUI or something like that out in town, that's a very Marine Corps thing to say. Um, they would still list that. And I never want to put a blemish on the Marine Corps or my sisters or brothers in arms. And that's the biggest thing that, and how does it inform my approach to life and business? I'm just trying to do my best to uplift that particular brand because I believe in it. And then that kind of suits into my belief in this whole experiment we have going on in America is that you need women and men who are willing to do those things so that we can do these things, right?
Mm. I would love for you to elaborate on that a little bit more if you're open to it. Um, the experiment that we have going on in America right now, and how you see all of that you've just shared as
Hmm.
potentially helping us in the future of surviving this simulation
Yeah.
that we're living in.
Well, what I mean by experiment is the United States period is an experiment on creating something more out of modern times, right? Like regardless of how it was created, and talking about the history, which is not ideal when you really dig into it, it still is an experiment on getting to a point where we're trying to find some versions of equality. And I think that of equality, freedom of things, being built on those premises, it makes it an experiment to can we get there. And so a fighting force I think is important to that. Now how we use it I think is something to always discuss and always continue to critique. I think that that's okay, even for the Marine Corps to say, hey, the way that the whoever the president is at the time, how do they use that fighting force? All of that stuff is up for interpretation and to be critiqued, and that's what makes the United States what it is. Even talking about our history and bringing those things to light, all of that is important to the experiment of can we get there? Can we get to a place where we have you know, more understanding from person to person, equality and freedom across the board through all of the systems that we work and live in? I think that, a lot of the temperature right now across our nation is we're not doing so great, right? but, but that doesn't mean we should stop the experiment,
Sure.
right?
Mhm.
I think that a lot of people are very fatigued. I'm fatigued. I'm tired, of having the conversations of, going to talk to people that I think are very dug into their stances, and they see me, and they see who I am in terms of my stance as an enemy in a lot of cases. And right now, on this platform or many others, I want to get to a place where we can have conversations without seeing the other person as an enemy. That's so polarizing right now. I think that we're doing it more and more. So, I think that a lot of people I serve with are very, they have opposing views to my own.
Mhm.
And I value that because it continues to challenge me. And I don't want to give up on that. I think that the tie and the bond to those people helps me continue to want to push to have those conversations as well. It might be painful, but it's important.
Sure.
It really
Well,
is.
and something that's standing out to me that I'm curious about, maybe you can confirm or deny for us. When many people, or at least when I think of the military, not everybody has a great experience in the military, right? And I imagine that all branches of the military are different, but one of the biggest challenges I've heard from veterans who didn't have a great experience is that they felt like if they had a disagreement with what those orders were, then they couldn't necessarily express that in a meaningful way. And what I'm hearing from you is that the message that you received, or at least the message that you take away with you, is the importance of that critique. And I wonder if that, maybe if you notice that that is something that's different about the Marine Corps from other branches, or like, is there anything that's pop into mind for you when I bring that up?
Yeah, I that resonates with me. I mean, there were definitely times when you're, lower ranking, you can see a problem, and there's not an avenue that you can speak up in a great way. There's a way to do it, but it's going to be challenging. But that's in place for a reason, right? Like
Sure.
it's in place for decision makers to be decision makers, and for junior Marines, or the other folks to be doers, right, in those particular moments. And I had to learn that. I had a challenging time learning that, right, because you get to a point, you're like, hey, I think we should do it this way, and somebody's like, yeah, I'm going to need you to go ahead and shut up now, and you have to learn how to be like, yeah, let me get some of that shutting up then. So um it is what it is. I think that as I grew in the Marine Corps, um I think you learn how to navigate that. If you do a 4-year stint, which is pretty normal, then you're probably not going to see the fruits of that growth for yourself to be able to navigate that. I know I really just got good at it more towards the end of my time.
Mhm.
And what I find with some of the Marines that stayed in is, they obviously, as they gained rank and stuff like that, they were able to communicate those things a little bit easier. The channels are a little bit easier, but that also comes with being more of an adult. When you're a junior Marine, you're like, a lot of folks, you're like 18, 19. I cringe thinking about, like, anything I might have said, that I thought was like a good idea during that time of my life. So,
Same.
you know, yeah, yeah. Like, I think anybody can, like, kind of, that that resonates with them. It just it's built that way for a reason. I will also say my experience is built on being a high performer.
Mhm.
I was my company honor graduate coming out of boot camp. I was my MOS school company honor graduate, MCT combat training company honor graduate, and then perfect scores on physical fitness and things like that coming into the Marine Corps. And I will say that drastically changed the experience I had.
Sure.
Right,
Mhm.
so I was made into somebody who could lead, or was an example at least for people to follow. And honestly, it was like good and bad, right? So, but it changed my experience. So, if I were to say something, right, given that like visual standing of who I was, then someone might take it, with a little bit more weight.
Sure.
Then, and that's not lost on me, that my experience throughout the Marine Corps, because within the unit or team, it's just like any team, any office that you work on. When people think that you're a high performer, that kind of puts some weight behind what your experience is going to be like. So,
Sure.
I think about some Marines who, they probably, given the opportunity, would have done things or operated in a way that would just be worthy of all the medals and all of the honors. But if you're not given that opportunity, then you only shine in a certain way. So back in garrison, when you're back here in the country, you're not at war, and I'm out here running, perfect scores for just basically, it's just like SAT, ACT, right? Like, you're like, oh, you think that student's going to be phenomenal, but like, how are they going to be in the
Mhm.
workforce, right? And so that's where the playing field really levels out.
Yeah.
And so I would say it's a bit of a shame, but hope, every you just want every Marine to get the opportunity to show what they really are made of. And so I think that there are a lot of Marines out there, or probably other service members, who don't get the opportunity to show where their strengths are given the scenario.
Sure.
You know what I mean? So, because I have no doubt that some of the Marines, maybe they don't run the perfect PFT score, which is the physical fitness test, or score the highest on some of the, like, just graded kinds of things. But I have no doubt in my mind that in country or in scenarios, they would perform as well or above someone who performs well on those graded assignments. I have no doubts about that. And so I think that people's experience is probably very, depending on what their timeline in the military had for them, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I thank you so much for your service and for sharing the experience with us. And I really want to dive into your business, but I could talk to you about this forever.
Yeah.
And one more question that's coming up that might be helpful for listeners is um, you mentioned the way that the Marine Corps has helped you adopt a sense of structure in your life that you really needed. And I know for me, and I'm assuming for at least some of our listeners, structure is a challenge. It's
Mhm.
clear that you also are a spontaneous and fun-loving guy. So I wonder how you've adopted that structure into your life now, because I'm sure it doesn't look the same. You're not like running drills in the morning, for instance. Maybe
Yeah.
you are.
Yeah, I still get up and run, not at the same time, but well, I've been actually running more at like 5 a.m. these days, out of necessity for the weather. But honestly, Brianna, I've had to lean into who I am, and I'm just not a very structured person. I need to do things sometimes like at 11 p.m.
Yeah.
I need to do things like I need to like not clean the house one day and I need to like really clean the house the next day, right? Like for no in particular reason other than the feeling and the vibe that's going on with me. Now my wife is completely opposite. She's very regimented and maybe that's like part of my like winning soup, right? Is like she's like in the soup making it like be soup and I'm like over there like spilling the sides out like getting it all over the table, right? But she's cleaning it up, getting it back in the
Yeah.
bowl. Um I can't, it just feels so cold to me. It feels like unnatural to be like, I get up at this time and I do this thing, and I can do that for like 3 days before I'm like, I'm just gonna eat potato chips right now, and then like I'm gonna run that off later, but this is chip time, and if anyone has a problem with that, like deal with it. So
Yes, I love that. Well, it sounds like one of the things that you learned about structure that you've implemented is that it's not your strength and you like to surround yourself with an environment that helps put some structure in there for you
yeah,
that isn't necessarily self-maintained.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, um, I do. There are certain things that I try to abide by, and that they have to get done. But the timing in which they get done, and I'm sure people who work with me will totally feel this, and it's really off the beaten path. I don't know. I think a lot of people like to feel like they're perceived as structured individuals, and I'm sorry, I've
I
just
love
given up
it.
on that shit. I mean,
Give it up.
just
Send it up.
like it, yeah, I don't know. You can only do but so much, right? Like if my life like seems like a mess in one moment, but I'm comfortable, then cool. I know that like I'm going to put it back in a certain way, but it's like this way because, like I said
Right.
earlier, you can't let things just like own you. You can't let like the perception of like a clean room or like that everything's packed and put away in its specific spot. I want to spend time with my kids, with my wife, with friends. That stuff is more important to me than like that everything's put away just right and that I arrive at a place at a particular time and do a particular thing. Like let's like I try not to put this on my friends too much, but like I will show up at your house with drinks and be like, "Yeah, let's you trying to do this now?" And they'll, like for them to just be like, hey, I try to call ahead now as an adult, right? People have kids and like wives. But I'll just be like, hey man, like I know that it's Thursday and it's lunch, but are you trying to get drunk right now? And, like I'm sorry, but I need friends where the answer is kind of yes sometimes. Like
Yeah. we can be spontaneous and just kind of go with what the day wants to bring us.
Yeah, or like just a couple, drinks with lunch or something, or maybe like I don't know, like I'm just gonna take the afternoon off or take the morning off or just do something different with the week. It kind of has to be that way for me to be productive in the next moment, right? Which will be like I don't know, work or do X, Y, or Z with your kids or what needs to be done. It feels like to me it's like always constantly preparing for tax season. I'm like always taking a break, preparing for the rigidity of something as stringent as taxes.
Sure. Yeah. No, you're absolutely among friends here. That is how we approach time management is really by embracing a sense of spontaneity and following where the energy is leading you in a given moment. At least for me and for the clients that we've worked with at Slice, that's what works when it comes to actually getting things done in a timely fashion, even if it doesn't look perfect, right? And I it's very gratifying, I guess, to hear a military man such as yourself say that that works for you too. So thanks for putting your stamp of approval on it, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that a lot of people, I mean, like the first thing that Marines do when they get out of the Marine Corps, wildly, if you're, I don't know, men and women, I don't know, but most of us dudes, we'll just grow a beard, right? Because we got to get away from everything that the Marine Corps was making us do.
Yeah,
I'm sure for because the hair regulations for women are very stringent. I'm sure it's always something like hair related. Like you want to just change the way that you look and just flow into this like you want to look everything but like a Marine for a little bit, right?
totally.
And then it's like as you get older, there's like this sliding scale of like Marineness that creeps back into your life until you turn into an old salty veteran. But but it's you got to find the right mix in between there, getting up at 5 a.m., working out, starting your work day, it being really regimented. I just feel like you're really gonna turn a lot of people off that way. you
You
know?
got to put that salt into a margarita and have a little fun.
For sure.
I love it.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's finally talk a little bit about what you've got going on professionally because I love
Mm,
talking with you about this. And you are the owner of Broadwing, which is a recruiting company.
mhm.
And you guys do things differently. One thing that has stood out to us here at Slice is how you prefer building partnerships over competing with other firms. That seems really unique to me, at least. And I wonder if you can tell us a little bit more about that approach. Maybe that was inspired by the military a little bit too. I could see how that would happen, but I'm very curious to hear, how did you come to value partnerships over competition and how is it working for you?
Yeah, it's working out well, especially in this moment where there's not a lot of hiring, at scale. The market was very hot prior to, quarantine and COVID-19 global pandemic. But now in this particular moment, there are companies that are still hiring, but not as many. Luckily for us, we had a diverse client base and have been able to, keep operating well. But the partnerships have been very strong. We've had, a couple hires with partnering firms that wouldn't have happened like in the way that I was brought up in recruiting. In recruiting, for a lot of people, they come up in an environment that's so cutthroat that even people within their own organizations, if it's other recruiters, like you want to beat them to that candidate and which is natural competition is fine, but cutthroat in a way that you would never share information about a client to another company.
Mhm.
Whereas it seems a little backwards, right? Like if I am, in a partnership, or let's say that I'm, just talking shop with another recruiter and I happen to mention who my client is, if they're able to sneak in and get that client from me, then maybe I wasn't that good in the first place. You know, my relationship with my clients should be strong enough and I should perform well enough that or something there has to be unique enough that they want to continue to work with me. Um and it's not like and now we live in, an age of information, right? Like anybody knows all the companies, right? Like you just go on Google and be like, tell me all the companies in Pittsburgh. And if you want, you can canvas all of them and try to get your sales game going on in there. So nothing's stopping you from competing with me. It just doesn't make the secrecy doesn't help the candidates. It doesn't help the companies, so the clients, and it doesn't help the firm to be so stringent. And I just felt like from my upbringing in recruiting, for me to be successful, I needed, again, to get away from the rigidity of what those models created.
Mhm.
Um, so for Broadwing, as a part of our openness to partnering, we want to do virtually whatever it takes. Like if I have a candidate that I just like, I cannot place because one of my clients rejected them, but I have a partner in recruiting or just somebody I know. Even it might not be a firm that I have like an official relationship with, but it can get the candidate. They can get the candidate into a really really good position or just a okay position. A position these days, right?
Right.
Like people want to work, then I'm going to send them over there and I'm not going to expect anything back.
Mhm.
Um, because we just have to help someone get their job. They should not get a job because I'm trying to make money off of the placement,
Mhm.
right? Like that's completely the wrong idea about being in recruiting and hiring. Yeah, I do want to make like money so that my company can keep doing fun things and I can keep having this like fluid play golf, make bourbon, boxes, lifestyle, go skiing on a mountain. But
As you
um,
should.
yeah, but at the end of the day, right, you have to stay true to what the mission is. And the mission for us is to get people into a position that they're excited about. Hopefully, I mean, just nothing feels better than being able to extend somebody an offer to a job that they're really, really excited about. That to me is phenomenal. And we shouldn't ever let some red tape stop that because of, we're trying to make a dollar off of that placement.
Sure. I absolutely love that approach. And I'm sure that your clients love it too, especially the individuals that you work with to get them placed. I know I would be so grateful, surprised in the best of ways to be sent over to a whole different recruiting firm just for a better opportunity. So I really appreciate that you are bringing that into the field. And I wonder, is there anything that you want to share? Anything else that you'd like to share about the background that brought you to this point in recruiting?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that recruiting is really natural for me. I love to have conversations with people and learn more about their skill sets, what they do. I love building things and hearing, like, I've talked to people who have built products who have been like very hands-on. Like I talked to somebody who was one of the like first set of engineers at Uber, right?
Wow.
And I'm like,
Mhm.
yo, like you built the thing? And they're like, yeah, I built the thing. And I'm like, that's so tight. Like I use the thing, right? Like this stuff and like Lyft engineers and some of these autonomous driving company people or people that work at Airbnb, like some of these apps and softwares and tech and that we just use. And to me, that is really, really it's interesting to get on the phone with them and they're talking about a project or a feature that they built on an app that I use like all the time. And they're just talking about it because it's like their job. But I'm like, that's crazy. Like I use it, it worked. Good job. Right.
Thank you. Yes.
And I think some of them get a little weirded out about my energy on that, but I'm like, you have no idea, like millions of people probably use this. I'm like, look at food showing up at my door because you did your job, like because you did Uber Eats. Like,
Yeah, thanks for that. I think your energy is perfect.
yeah.
Thank you for bringing that.
But I love that part of recruiting. I try to like bring the positivity. There's a lot of negativity that goes on with recruiting. I think because people they don't want to talk to other people for one. Like if there's anything that a lot of people don't want to do is like talk to other people. I think we've let that narrative just generally kind of win in this modern day and age. But the truth is, if you're going to work at a place, then you're going to have to eventually talk to a person. And for most
Sure.
roles, right? Especially if you're going to change jobs, then a lot of my job is to advocate for you as a candidate to
Mm.
tell your story, because you're not getting in the door if I can't tell your story well. So when I talk to you, like, I need you to kind of tell me your story. Like, what are you looking for? What do you want to do with the next thing you do in your career, right? Like, you're already established in this way. What's next for you? And I just try to ask those, very simple questions. But the more that a candidate elaborates for me, the more I can tell their story to the hiring manager and get them excited. I can't get them excited if you're like, I just want a job. And
Yeah.
this is very interesting. It's actually very American to be this way. Um,
Mm.
there are some countries where, a job is a job is a job, and that's just natural across the board. I find that a lot of Eastern European countries, we've sometimes talked to candidates where, you know, they're like, "What do you need me to do?" And you can tell them what you need them to do, and they're like, "Yeah, I can do that thing." And that's like the end of the conversation. It's very American to be like, "I need to hear your passion, your drive. What kind of impact do you think you can have here at the company?" And for some countries, some people, they're just like, do you need the software built?" And and you're like, "Yeah." And they're like, "I can do that." And you're
Mhm.
like, "Well, but would you love it?" And they're like, I can do it." And you're like, love, say it with me. Do you love it?" Right? Like, it's,
That's funny. Well, I wonder what you think of that. Do
I,
you Yeah,
you
tell
have
me
to,
more.
you have to like, you have to be thoughtful of that, right? Because that person could be really good for the company.
Sure.
And so forcing them to be like, passionate, if that's not what their personality is, you have to be able to read into that too. Some people just aren't passionate about their work, but that doesn't mean they're not good at it. And that doesn't mean that they would take away from that team's environment. They might be the key that like pushes that company over, into the next level. So, it's kind of a candidate by candidate thing. I do really enjoy to get the candidate that I can, you know, get them pumped and get them excited and, all of that jazz. But you do have to be thoughtful that that's not going to be every person, but that doesn't mean that they're not a good worker, they're not a good candidate. Their background, and I'm sure we'll talk more about this, but a person's background means everything, right? Like, maybe that's just what they were taught. Like, you go to work, you come home every day, and then you go to work the next day, and like,
Sure.
you do an adequate job. So, and
Sure.
that's okay too. So there's a lot of differences there.
Well, and it seems to me like there could be a sort of consistency that comes along with that approach to work. And it might not even necessarily mean a person isn't passionate about what they do, as much as that there's not like an emotional volatility there that's connected to the work. I could see how that would lead to more consistent performance, honestly.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I mean, I think I wonder if people find a friend of mine, he's Canadian. Canada's not that far,
Yeah.
right? Um,
No.
but something he noted about the American worker is he's like, I don't understand the infinite optimism that you all have. Like, it can be the most impossible task. And I'm like, on one side, the American in me is like super proud to like hear this, right? I'm like,
Sure.
you right? Like, we
Like,
can
yes,
do
we
anything.
can. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And he's like, sometimes you can't. And I'm like, no, we can. He's like, you don't even know what the task is yet. Look at you. You're already all over this. But I wonder if like other people with different backgrounds, they just look at us like, what is wrong with these people? Like, but we are like that. Like, and this bleeds into recruiting pretty heavily, but it can be the most basic job, right? Like, if you are, I don't know, if you work on a farm for that like, what is it, for hops, I don't know, that like goes into the beer, then like eventually, like, I just imagine like you're watching the Budweiser commercial and like they show you that person who's like in the field as like the plane flies over and the horses are like running through the hay, and like that person, like that proud, like, yeah, I make the beer. And I'm like, yeah, you do. They love that. Look at
Yeah.
them. And like, we need that. We need that like tie and, emotion. I don't know. It's just built into us. I feel like America's passion all comes from like World War II.
And
We just all
Say
carry that,
more. Tell us more.
just like that vibe of like we could do this,
Mhm.
right? Even though like the task is like, hey, we don't have a lot, but we gotta go across the world and like defeat this enemy. I feel like we still carry that energy into our work. It was a very interesting time for us as a nation. So I just I wonder how that perception is from other countries to the American worker. We just carry that weight.
Yeah. Gosh, there's so much that we could talk about here. There's so much. I'm really having to resist diving into this pool of the like emotional American worker conversation and what other countries must think of us.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's interesting. We one, some things that we don't, there's like things that come along with that, right? Like we don't do well, right? Like we don't take breaks well,
Sure.
right? Like I saw this meme that my brother-in-law and my sister-in-law were sharing with me that said like um it's like European, right? And then it's like time off and the email response to like being sent something while you have time off, right? To set the stage. And the European response was like, I'm off for the next like 3 months. Any emails sent during this time will be deleted. Like, cheers, right? And then the American response was like, sorry, I've been in the hospital with an emergency for the past, few hours. Emails may be delayed by 20 minutes, right? Like that is we don't do that well. Like we don't take the time to just like get your life together. And then, we wonder why like after like 40 years, doing one job, our lives are in shambles sometimes, but
Mhm.
there's positives and negatives to our approach to work. We get stuff done.
Sure. Well, and I'm just so curious. The thing that keeps calling to me to ask about is something about the emotion of us, like it takes a lot of emotion to carry that much positivity into what you're doing, that can-do attitude. And I wonder if we are open enough to the other side of that spectrum, because from everything that I've experienced, the other side of the spectrum is there, and we have to be able to take those breaks, to take time and do our hobbies, to spend some time with ourselves, to kind of recalibrate and let the things settle and learn about ourselves, right? And you've noted a couple times we have a hard time as a people doing that. We have a hard time as Americans. It's like we have to be positive all the time. And I wonder if there's anything that you'd want to say about that.
Yeah, well, so our work environments don't allow us to be otherwise,
Mhm,
right? So we need good hiring managers, good managers, period, right? We need good teammates. We need people that are going to say, hey, like if you're going on vacation, like throw your phone in the ocean, throw it directly in the sea,
yeah.
and like never look at it, and like we'll buy you a whole new one when you get
I
back.
love
And
that approach. Yeah.
like, but we don't do that, right? We're like, oh, you're going on vacation, like we like some manager like in the background lets out like a loud sigh, like, oh, like how long are you going to spend time with your dumb family? Like, that's that's more us in to be like, oh well, so and so's out, and like things are just crazy right now. I think I read this. I wonder if I can't really remember if it was an article or whatnot, but it was like things don't have to be crazy. I think it's a book. Looking at my shelf of very stereotypical CEO entrepreneur books,
Mhm,
but like things don't have to be crazy.
mhm,
They don't have, like, if they are crazy, like no one's doing a good enough job like mitigating the crazy. Now if your company is going after some ambitious goals but it's just burning people out,
mhm,
I don't know, then that's something to think about. I think very successful entrepreneurships, of course, for a few people and for a period of time, it definitely burns them out.
mhm,
you know I a company that I think about a lot is like Slack, or um just a couple of like smaller services firms that grew very quickly, or or in high tech environments, or where the demand was high, and these companies that have still managed to like protect their teammates and move to policies that encourage people to take breaks. I think it's possible.
Hmm.
I just think that companies have to put more emphasis on it. Um, if you do achieve, maybe I wonder if this is a bit too deep of a dive into, the American worker and how we think about these things. But let's say you are successful. Let's say you're the first company to get an autonomous vehicle out there, and something's on the streets, and you're doing, and your company did it, but you know 2 years after the fact, everybody who ever worked for you is like, that sucked, you were awful, and you drove us into the dirt constantly. I don't For me personally, I don't want that success.
Hmm.
And maybe that's why I'm not like, some CEO of like a 400 person services firm. I think I'm okay with that, but I just wonder if maybe we got to want a little bit more, like less, if that makes any sense. Like we can still achieve the goal, maybe with more people, maybe on a slower time frame, but I feel like it's taking a big toll on a lot of folks to go so quickly and so hard with not any kind of natural amount of rest. Does that make
Oh,
sense?
absolutely. It makes a ton of sense. And I absolutely agree with you. I feel like it would do so many of us in America a lot of good if we welcomed a slightly slower, more well-rounded pace, I guess. It's like,
Yeah.
let's be willing to actually look at all elements of our life, not just tunnel vision on the goal we're trying to reach. Oh, there was another thought that just floated away, and I'm going to keep it moving because we
Yeah.
have so much good stuff to talk about. So, Broadwing.
Yeah.
Broadwing is a remote business, which I love, and you go all over the country to work with your clients. But we've also talked about how you're really involved in your local community.
Mm.
And I would love to hear about the way that you manage that. Is that something intentional that you do?
Yeah, it's really intentional. I think that those are two separate brands that you have to work on. I think that you have to be able to, like, when it comes to like traveling and working in different. You have to like learn an ecosystem and environment. Simple stuff like if I'm recruiting in Colorado, and my clients in a particular place, and I'm recruiting candidates in that region. I need to know stuff like how far is someone willing to travel to that office, or or something like that. Like I need to know the terrain, and what people do or don't want, from a job perspective in that area. So if it's like being very targeted out there, but being local, that brand is way more intentional because it takes time to build, who you are with people in an area that means something, right, to them. That when they hear like Broadwing, or if they hear Ken Hicks, what do they think about? Does anybody know you? Can you be a resource for someone local, and a push and growth for the community that you work and live in? Because honestly, right, you can be a company or a brand, like operate in that area and do literally nothing for the people that are like nearby. You could do that, and probably no one will call you out on it. Like you could just, but it's important to me to be a lot more than just like a company reaping the benefits of a nice community or whatnot. I think it's really important to take the brand into, really, and try to give to people who can give
Mhm.
nothing back, right? Like I want to be a community type of organization where my teammates, not just like the community that the company's in, I want them to learn how to go out into the communities that they live in and volunteer. Like when COVID first hit, um, my teammate Holly, she sent, this was all her idea. I was trying to encourage, us to volunteer and do what we could. We held meetings to try to come up with different things, and She doesn't even live down here in Pittsburgh. She's remote, out of Corning, actually, and she sent notes to two of some very local nursing homes where they, stopped visitors from coming at all. And she and some of my loved ones up there in Corning, this like will forever mean the world to me, being the founder of this company. They hand wrote notes to the
Mm.
people in the nursing home, at a time when they couldn't get letters at all, and or not, sorry,
Mhm.
not letters, visitors, and really to try to just give maybe a voice or some encouragement to those people. And these are ideas that they came up with. My teammate Tommy, he was out here all the way up until he couldn't go anymore. Getting out to the Pittsburgh Food Bank. I was volunteering, sending some financial support and in-person support to Needful Cafe, which is local here, and I want that to be a part of who we are. Let's say we're a team of three for the rest of the time this company is in operation. Well, then we'll be a team of three working in our communities, our to the best of our ability. I just think that brand is more intentional, and to me, it brings me a little bit more peace to not. I'm very critical of, like we talked about earlier, this experiment that we're doing. But if you're not getting out in the community and meeting different people and hearing their stories and trying to help them and trying to help somebody who has nothing to do with your background and experience or what your company does, then in my opinion, then you should shut up. You just, to put it completely bluntly, if you're not going to help people and learn who they are and hear their story, then you have nothing to say about what this community needs, or I'll take it even a step further than what this country needs. If we can take on a better approach, and I know for a fact a lot of companies, they spend like once or twice a year, maybe if that, to get out and volunteer, and it's always driven by team members or something like that, right? Give your Make it so that your teammates once a week can spend half a day volunteering. You're a company that raises, if you're a startup company and you just raised 600 million, 700 million, $1 billion, you can allow some team members to spend half a day a week going out into the community and making a difference. You can stop stepping over the homeless people that are right in front of your office, and spend the time to get out in the community and try to make a change. I don't know if you can move the needle, but the attempt is everything. When that kind of cash is flowing to these companies, all to the same people, all to the same groups of people, I'm not just like that, legitimately pisses me off.
Yes, same. And it's actually reminding me of the conversation that we just moved on from, which is, the positivity of the American worker, right? And something that I've been noticing a lot lately, I wonder what you think of this, is that we've almost been bred to be so positive because we're grinding the wheel for those people who might be receiving most of the resources. And I love this shift in leadership that I'm hearing from you. That's like, let's celebrate and become, more importantly, let's become those leaders that want to spread the wealth around, literally. When we're receiving in our business, let's give that back to the communities that are surrounding us that need that nourishment. uh yeah, what do you think of all that?
Yeah, I do. I see, like, very, and I talk about this all the time with people. People think that, not to get like political with it, but the way that people look at our system in general is that, oh, well, if you work really hard, then eventually you can rise up and be one of those people, which may be true. You need like a lot of luck, right? You can come up with an idea, and then on top of that, you got to be like a driver of people yourselves and burn them out, and stand on all of their shoulders to get yourself to the
Mhm.
top. But it just, in my opinion, doesn't have to be that way, right? Like, maybe what we do here at Broadwing will always be smaller scale. I don't know. I'm still like walking through my journey of like, do I want to build this into like a bigger firm? Like, what is my overall
Sure.
goal, right? But whatever I do, I don't want to do it on the backs of people, right? Like I whatever it is that I achieve, I want to achieve it as much as possible with people. That's why for our recruiters, we have a really different setup where they get such a large portion of the commission versus if they were at a different firm. If people work for Broadwing, they'll you I haven't heard another competitor yet that gives out such a commission the way that we do. And that's for the like I want buy-in, I want your life to improve and enhance. Like because you work at a place that values how much it can stink to get one single hire. It's
Yep.
tough, especially in a challenging market. So that should be greatly appreciated, right? Like it just it doesn't have to be on the backs of people. We should be more thoughtful about, I think it like a lot of people take the approach of like, oh well, it's funny how we act about like billionaires, right? We're like, oh well, we shouldn't tax them more because they worked hard to get there. Like I'm sorry, but that person who is like baling hay at like 40 years old so that like Budweiser can make more beer, baling hops, I don't know, whatever they're doing, they also work really
Yeah.
hard and they're giving their body to whatever that is. So to disperse the money a little bit more, getting programs that give cash to communities in a different way is not like taking away from the American dream. To me, it's enhancing it for a broader spectrum of
Mhm.
people. So I I really wish that the narrative that everything is fine and the system is set up to benefit literally everybody would go away. Huge companies right now, like I'll be completely honest with this. Okay, as I started Broadwing, I personally started making more money, which allowed me, well, for one, to take on more hobbies.
Mhm.
So, my general life is just better, right? Like people like just like up and go skiing in Colorado, like, yeah, I can do that, right? My life is just generally better. Here's the other or my quality of life and the things that I want to do, right? I'm not saying my life is better than other people's, but my quality of life, the time I can spend relaxing and the things that I can do with that are better for myself than previous to that. Here's the other thing. I have money that I can invest, right? Because yes, I did work hard to get to this particular point, but now I can play in a different game that I wasn't able to play in the past, right? Because my company performs. So now, like, it's like a sliding scale of improving, which is very interesting because I can watch people who work harder than me, but if you play the game in this like really right way, then it's funny how things start to skew in your favor versus like my wife who's worked in a hospital system for I want to say close to 7 years now. And she has gotten promoted and that's been great, but it like very incrementally.
Yep.
And and she's luckily not in ER nurse anymore, but she was doing that. She did that in Washington DC and she did that here in Pittsburgh and then she's worked on a couple of different units and now she's in nurse education and and that's all good and well, but honestly, like she busts her ass and she spends time outside of work to make sure that everything's right because she is very regimented. She'd have made a phenomenal Marine for sure. But she, the like I'm for me to like make as much money as she makes, like I'm gonna type on my computer for a little while, like talk to a couple of people, and then like it's like imbalanced. The more money that somebody makes, the and maybe it makes sense, the easier things become, but I just feel like there's no incentive for like I could just not give anything away at all, right? Like the tax situation shouldn't become easier for me, and remain as challenging for somebody who's trying to come out of the middle class or out of, whatever, or lower middle class or below the poverty line. Like we shouldn't have cities where the poverty line is $75,000 a year, right? Like that to me, and that's so I'm talking about I'm being critical of San Francisco,
Okay.
where the poverty line is like. So here's how I found out about this. one of the Golden State Warriors basketball players who was like, I don't know if he was a rookie or something like that, but he came up on a 10-day contract. So, Golden State, they play in San Francisco or they used to be in Oakland.
Hmm.
And this is an NBA player, but because his contract was so minimal, when he first started out at 75 or something like that, $1,000 a year or 100, they were joking that he was technically below the poverty line in San Francisco, an NBA player. Now, the city, I don't know if you've ever been to SF, it's the amount, the homeless population,
It's huge.
it's bad news.
Hmm.
It is bad news. Now, let's compare that to the other view of the city, which is where's all this like the VC funding and you know all of this capital being poured into to the innovation and I, no qualms about it. I absolutely love California. Like legit, tried to move my family there like on 25 different occasions now.
Yeah.
So, but I'm critical of it because I should be critical of everywhere in this system, right? Even a place that I love.
Hmm.
And so, where is all this capital for innovation coming in? Um, right there, that money is right there, and none of it seems to be going to really drastically improve this homeless scenario. I believe some of the brightest minds are sitting right there in that area, and we're not attacking that problem. I know some people are. um I know a person, she's an ex-googler. I guess that's what they call people who worked at googler, and she was there very early on. I think she was at Facebook for a while. And I got an opportunity to work with her at Aurora, an autonomous driving company. And her work with Second Harvest, a food bank there, is phenomenal. So I know there are people doing it. It's just not at the scale that I think could really, really help. So, it's, I could go on for days about, kind of, the way I think that cash should flow. I don't think that my model is exactly the right one. I don't think that, for innovation and growing and going fast and competing against other nations in terms of tech and whatnot, I get that's challenging. I just think that we could be better.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And, who cares necessarily about being right on your model? It's like, let's be willing to just try.
Oh yeah, yeah, for
It
sure.
kind of goes back to the original conversation of be willing to do something badly, at least try something, and it'll show us how we can proceed from there. I do hope that we're on the cusp of some changes like that happening in our country.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, just to be completely honest, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen with this election. It's really hard to read and tell. I think that we're all coming of an age where we, even just in general, like you pay more attention, and then also politicizing everything has become all the rage here in the States. Period. So it's hard to watch from 4 years ago. It's hard to know what will happen, but I think that you have two differing views on how to approach here. I wish we had more options to choose from, in terms of who's going to be the leader of the nation. I feel like two seems pretty small of a conclusion to come to from, you know, a few billion people, but here we are. And I think it's I think it's really challenging to put things in place that one side will not still continue to eat at. We've seen even in this administration, the past administration's work on certain programs has just been continuously attacked, right? So, and then subsequently, what if, let's say that there's a new administration that comes in, then there will be things from this administration that we spend time tearing down, and it's like, so do we? When do we get the new things in that that help these efforts when we're busy working against maybe someone's past legacy or something like that? It never really seems progressively looking forward as much as it seems like implementing our brand in that particular moment once we have enough power as a party or something like that. And so I'm not very optimistic on that front. Unfortunately, that there will be drastic change that allows us to really, I think the word I'm looking for is like democratize the flow of cash, to communities, to different organizations, small, large, and everything in between.
I guess we'll see what happens.
Yeah, that's for one thing we will see.
We'll be here,
Yeah,
hopefully. I mean, and the reason that I am hopeful is because I'm sitting here having a conversation with you, and I hear how you're leading your company, how you're nourishing your community, right? And I know that the values we live by here at Slice, that I in Slice, it stands for interdependence, which is really all about, instead of building things off of other people's backs, like you were saying, instead of competing ruthlessly against each other and clinging to our independence in that way. Let's start coming together as independent people who are supporting each other in an interdependent
yeah,
way. And even if it takes a really, really long time, it does make me feel hopeful that at least you and I are having this conversation. And hopefully there's somebody listening to it right now. And maybe they feel similarly. And it's just like setting up one domino at a time, I
yeah.
guess, right?
I hope that people, not just people listening to it, I hope that people are out there right now, coming out of their dug-in positions and starting from a place of empathy. I've talked with this ad nauseum with people, that starting from a place of empathy when it comes to how companies operate, what's going on with people, that when it comes to legislation, what we should advocate for. Um, that we have to start from a place of empathy and hearing someone else's story, and how can we make the decisions that improve the quality of life for both the least of us and the greater and the haves, the people that have the most. And sometimes that takes for people that have to give more, right? And
Mhm.
I hope that we can do a lot more of that.
I hope so too. I really hope so too, because what I can't help but notice about those people who have a lot and they work towards a lot and don't necessarily give a lot back, it's like it's never satisfying to just take and take and take and, conquer and conquer and conquer and just like it's not a balanced way of being, and it seems clear to me that it doesn't really satisfy the people who are living that way either, or
Yeah.
else.
You know what I do want to say to you though, that we should, I've seen this in, I can't believe what we're shown when we look into what the internet, like it's the mirror of who we are, right?
Yeah.
And the problems and things that people think don't exist, what people are willing to say. I mean, it can be a really, really dark place. But something that really was kind of disheartening to me was I was watching, as an NBA player giving um, money to other people who might be out of work in some capacity. Now, these other people, have been gainfully employed to great amounts in the past. But of course, this NBA player gives to a number of things, right? Not just this one thing. But he was trying to help out another person, and the first person was like, "Oh, great, giving to somebody who already has or something like that." Everybody's out of work. Everybody's hurting right now. To be critical of giving in any capacity, I just it to anybody who's being lessened by a situation.
Mhm.
I think that saddens me maybe the most right now. Like if you're giving to anybody at all, and I think that maybe I feel like when people eventually get called out, like we're seeing a lot of this right now, where eventually somebody finds out that you work here and you're doing this thing. I think that getting doxxed or whatever the case may be, and then that person, after they're being shown the mirror of what they said, then they're saying, "Oh, I'm not like that." You are like that. You absolutely are like that. You were in your rawest moment. You were like that, and I know a lot of us have really bad moments. But when it comes to giving, and charities, there's a lot of charity. Like there, let's say, let's say it's an extremely conservative effort, right?
Mhm.
And I disagree with that group or those persons' policies, even though I don't label myself as a liberal or a Democrat, but oftentimes I would say I'm probably more center left than anything.
Same.
If I see that group and I disagree with just about everything that they try to advocate from a legislation standpoint,
Mhm.
but they're giving to somebody in need, we've really got to stop being so this is my team that I'm not willing to applaud that effort because I am.
Sh
I am personally, and it's something that you have to work on for sure. But like, man, that's to me like a part of the fabric of what's going on right now that really, really saddens me. Like, just help as many people and as different of groups of people as you possibly can in the ways that you can. I mean,
Oh, yeah.
yeesh.
I hear you loud and clear, and I agree. I would love to see people encouraging each other a little bit more often. I was actually just listening to another podcast yesterday. A mutual friend of ours, Lauren Joyce, has a new podcast called The Magnetic Woman Show, and she was interviewing Alison Armstrong, who's the author of The Queen's Code.
Mhm.
It's a great book, especially for any women who might be listening to this. But they were discussing criticism and how it's really not an effective way of communicating with anyone. And that really stuck out to me. We criticize each other so much, and it just isn't the most effective way to have a conversation and get things done. It creates enemies of each other right off the bat, right?
Mm.
And I would also love to see a little bit more encouragement and a little less criticism.
I think it's easy to say, you know, this should be done differently. It's the easiest thing to do in the world,
Oh, yeah.
right? I think it's what's more challenging is to put yourself in the position of a decision maker and be like, what choices did they have?
Mhm.
What timeline were they working with? What resources do they have? And how did they choose to use them? Who's helping? And is it worth this criticism, right? To like, if I'm not going to, first of all, put myself in their shoes, but like, I find this is valuable with my son as he gets older. Is if I'm going to level some criticism on him, as we all parents will find that we're just doing at a clip that you just don't full for me, like you don't want to be this critical, but you're like also I don't want like later for you to be like the worst, and then that's my fault. I didn't, I didn't do enough for you. But if I'm going to level criticism on him, then I also need to be willing to like get right next to him and show him again and again and again how to do the thing that I'm being critical of, or like just get in the trenches with him, right? Like, hey, like this, I told you that was incorrect, but like this is like just saying that is very easy. But to me, my personal growth is to get in the trenches with him to show like for very recently it's been soccer. He doesn't quite understand the games about he doesn't understand the effort. It was really challenging for me. Me and my wife are both Division 1 athletes. Like I know he's only 6, but I'm like, damn it. Like get it together, right? And so, after some conversations, so now like I'm out here practicing soccer with him in the backyard. I played soccer like YMCA level, and like that was it. You know what I mean? Like, so this it's not a sport that I do, but I can't just criticize him if I'm not going to help him.
Sure.
And I think that I'm trying to carry that more into even my adult relationships as well.
I love that. The one liner that's coming to mind is what makes criticism constructive is a lot of love involved.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, and I'm trying to like learn more of that all of the time. How do I talk to friends, other adults? Another thing that's very American, right? Is like you don't tell your friends like you don't. It's hard for us to open up and be honest with our friends to be like, hey, like you suck at this thing and it's impacting how I see you. like like um maybe that's one of the best things about the Marine Corps is like you're encouraged to tell your friends that they suck. Like, hey, do better. Like that's like part of the fabric. But we don't do that very well. And then when we do it, right, like feelings get hurt and we don't accept that. But maybe if we encourage ourselves to follow up with more love and compassion in that, and to show them like, yeah, I'm gonna work through this with you, or and give context as to why I'm criticizing you because I want you to be better. Maybe we'll
Yeah.
do that more with our peers and friends, but we also have to be better at receiving that too, right? Like,
Oh, absolutely.
yeah, like we're trash at receiving. We are absolute garbage at someone being like, "Hey, you're doing this wrong." Like, what do you mean I'm doing it wrong? Are you criticizing my parents, my upbringing, where I come from? Like,
Yeah.
we're very aggressive about that kind of thing.
You're somehow in my head. I've been thinking about this a lot lately, how, starting with me, everybody needs to get better because we're entering a time where there's going to be a lot of criticism.
Yeah, yeah,
We have a lot of growing to do,
yeah.
and we have to be willing to receive that. And I wonder if maybe you were talking about empathy a moment ago, and I love bringing that into the criticism conversation because, first of all, anything we're noticing about somebody else and the way that they're acting, living their life, making their choices, there's a part of us that has that inside of us that
Mm,
we can relate to it because if we didn't, we wouldn't notice it. And that's shown itself to be true time and time again
yeah.
in my life, at least. And I would love to see more people doing exactly what you said, which is just putting ourselves in another person's shoes and using that empathy to inform the expectations that we're putting on people.
I wonder if we do that. Do we? I wonder if do you think we do that enough with adults anymore? Right? Like we don't level expectations because we're so busy saying that everybody should do what they feel and what they love and what they want to, right? Which is like some parts big time true, right? But there are also like
Mhm.
there's some version of this too where it's like if it's a close friend or a colleague or something that we got to be able to be like, hey, I think that this is what your goal is, and the things that you're doing right now don't align with that, and you're taking the
Yeah.
longest way around, or you're going to derail yourself completely. Like, I know that you want these things, if it's somebody that you talk with frequent enough, like, hey, I hear you want these things, but I think that you should, maybe take a look at X, Y, and Z because you're, not headed towards the right path. Do you think that I just don't know if we do that enough, right? Like,
Yeah, I would say in general I agree with you. It's and the reason why it comes to mind so quickly is because these types of relationships are something that I've been really focused on building in my own life lately, where emotional honesty is like front and center. That's a huge
yeah,
value of just mine personally. And certainly it weaves into the work that I do here at Slice, but just in general, I want to be able to be honest with the people in my life about what I am experiencing in that moment. And if that means that something that they did sat oddly with me, I have to be able to say that. And if I can't, then that relationship, it has no legs. It's not going to last.
yeah,
And the reason why I say I don't think we do that enough is because it's been very challenging to keep relationships that way. The ones that I have are
yeah,
fantastic, and the honesty is irreplaceable in my life. The insight that I would get from somebody who says, "Hey, I see you have this goal, and you really just need to believe in yourself a little bit more because I hear that you aren't believing in yourself," or something like any kind of feedback like that. It's so helpful and powerful, and it's like the biggest shortcut that we could ever find to our goals when we surround
yeah.
ourselves with people who will be honest with us about things like that.
Emotional honesty. I like that a lot. Um, a tidbit. So here's something. I don't know why I'm on this kick about talking about what's American and what's not. Here's something we do as Americans that's really confusing to people. We pose like, let's say I see you, me and you work together, and I see you in the morning in the office, and I say, "Hey, Brianna, how are you doing?" And you'll say, "Good." and you'll say, "How are you?" And I'll say, "I'm doing well, making it happen." And then I'll proceed on with my day, and you'll proceed on with yours, regardless of whether either of those things is true, right? Like I just got into a fight with my wife last night. Like there's water in my basement, and I might like mention like one of those. I'm like, like the water, a little bit of flooding, but you're like, oh, like you guys doing things for that? And I'm like, yep. And then you'll go on about your day, right? It's this insatiable need. Like that's the standard greeting. It's a question, and there's standard responses regardless of what's actually true. So a friend of mine, I used to work with, Abby Lockery. She's doing her own thing now, and we established this thing where we could be honest with each other without placing the burden on the other person, because you feel like it's very American to hear if I'm like, I'm just really not doing great, then you're like, oh, like what's going on, you feel like you have to like pull up a chair and solve that for me or sit down and talk with me. But it really, that prevents people from being honest,
Mhm.
because like I don't want to waste your time, because that's also very American. I don't want to take up any of your time. So we developed this thing where we agreed that when we saw each other in the morning, that we would say exactly how we were feeling, and the other person would accept that and immediately walk away.
I love
so
that.
so I would be like, "Hey, Abby, how are you?" And she could be like, "I'm awful. This is the worst day of my life." And I would have to just eat that and be like, "I hope that gets better," and walk away, right? Not to have to own that and live that in that moment. And I like miss Abby because of this, because we don't work together anymore. But I miss being able to just be like, "Oh, I'm really great. I'm really great." And not have to give any context, because if people like, they're like, "Oh, like what's going on? Why are you like, Abby, I'm really great today." And she could be like, "Great, that's good to hear. I'm not great." And I'll be like, "That's, hey, hope that improves." Walk away. Don't have, but just being able to have that emotional honesty in that moment was like really cool. I don't know if she feels the same way, but I miss telling her I was bad. I miss
Maybe you
being
guys
like,
have to have morning meetings.
yeah, I miss just being like, "I'm bad today," and her being like, "Yep, all right, we'll see you."
Well, I will put it out there. I might have to practice because I am totally a person who wants to pull up a chair and be like, "How can I support you?" Just who I am, but I would be happy to have that relationship as well if you ever just need a witness.
Just to be like, "I'm bad right now," and someone to be
I'll
like,
just kind of
"Cool."
reflect it back to you and say,
Yeah.
"Okay, I'm here. Let me know if there's anything and bye. Have a good day." I don't know.
You gotta
See
have,
how awkward that is, but we can just not be perfect, right?
I mean, it's something about like being able to be honest with the question. I don't know. It's, people feel like they have to say, I almost nowadays, if someone's like, "How are you doing?" And I'm like, "Not great," I will follow that up with like, "I don't need you to do anything about that. We don't have to talk about it. Just not an ideal day. Like we can keep drinking the beer. I'm just drinking it for a different reason than you are. That's all." like,
Sure, yeah.
like, so I don't know. It's a skill. We got to build on it. We're doing it. It's different.
No, I absolutely love that. And yes, to all forms of emotional honesty,
Yeah.
I am all for it. And so on that note, I wonder, because one of the questions I would love to ask you is, and I know we kind of veered away from the whole coronavirus workforce topic, but
Woof.
something I'm super interested in hearing, especially with this conversation considered, we've talked about empathy and now we're talking about emotional honesty and how that might impact people. I wonder how you see industries responding to the coronavirus and what markers do you notice for success? Would you consider these traits to be among them? Let me know what you think about that.
Yeah, it's maybe too early to tell. I would say for me, I've noticed some companies not do some really not great things, when it comes to, who is an essential worker, putting people in harm's way, getting them back into the office, maybe a little too rushed. But I've seen some companies do some phenomenal things. I've seen like Twitter was like, "We're never coming back to the office ever again," right? Or Google just came out. They're like, "Look, everybody can work from home until 2021. Just that way no one's stressing about like, am I coming back this fall? We don't know what our kids are doing, this, that, and the other. Just everyone stay home, right? And I think that some, especially for some of the larger companies, I think that that's probably more challenging. But I've seen some small companies not just follow suit, probably be ahead of those timelines and be like, yeah, we're this is indefinite. We'll come back like when it's safe. And I think that to me, the flexibility and the adaptability to say, yeah, like Zoom videos nonstop, not ideal, but it is what it is. It's greater than rushing people back um, for what? What if someone does get sick in your environment? How will you feel if I, were to have my like we stopped in person volunteering because it wasn't right, to keep putting to have team members, going out and getting in harm's way. And so I just think the flexibility has been the thing I've seen be very, very successful. You're trying to keep up your brand even with your own team members, right? So you gotta protect them. You have to show them that you're taking steps to try to protect them. I follow sports really closely, and I notice some of the distrust between the players unions and the organizations like the NFL, MLB, or NBA. If they're showing that the money is more important than their safety, people see that pretty clearly, and it's not a good vibe for your employees. And when we do get through this,
Right.
they're gonna remember that. They're gonna remember how you treated them when things were really, really scary and really, really bad. And that can be from small instances, from what your direct manager is laying on your plate during a time when there's a very serious situation, to what the company's overall arching policies are. So I think that the flexibility to say, even on an individual level, like, what are you most comfortable with? I've seen that work really, really well. I think that other companies really got to take a look in the mirror. I know that I've seen some peer companies have to shut their doors. Broadwing is not, completely safe from what this is. Our partnerships have made us stronger for sure. So I'm glad we have those in place with, partnering firms and then having a diverse client base in different industries. But before I would have somebody, let's say a client was like, well, we need you to come on site and assess what we're doing for hiring. And let's say it could be for $250,000. I'm sorry, but I can't take that money if it's going to put my team members in danger. Let's say, I'm like, oh, okay, Tommy, Holly, like, let's drive down here and get on. If that was the option, we're going to make $250,000. I'm sorry, but that's a risk I'm not willing to take right now, when there are other avenues to get this done without us coming to your office. We're not a cleaning firm. We don't do anything physical that we can't do on computers with video conferences or the like. So I hope that people look in the mirror and make some of those decisions, that the dollar is way less important right now than people's lives.
Sure, absolutely. It seems like a theme of what we could all benefit to learn from moving forward, that a dollar, it matters very little when compared to people's lives and bigger issues. And so another thing I'm noticing from what you said is that it's becoming incredibly clear which companies actually care about the people. Not only, and it's not only employees, right? But even your clients. I'm very uninterested in working with a company or going to a business or anything like that that's clearly showing me that they don't care about their employees or clients or both. um it's never been clearer. That's something that I'm hearing from what you said. And the flexibility is also standing out to me big time when you mention that people should get more used, right? I don't think you use that language, but people could get more used to those individual conversations, right? Like what works for you as an individual. I can only imagine the pushback that one might receive on, especially in large organizations, how do what you expect me to consider each individual
Okay.
person that's working for me? And how could that ever possibly be time efficient without a way to systematize what we're doing and just kind of deal with it all in one foul swoop? I wonder if you have any thoughts about that, how you've seen people manage that successfully.
I mean, it's gonna be hard on managers. Anything that you're adjusting to is hard on managers, right? And but the key thing that kind of sticks out to me that you said there is the time, right? Like how do you do all this and in one foul swoop and without exceeding time? Like, well, sorry, this is going to take more time. Like it just is. This is a completely unknown scenario and a situation you don't plan for. And if something takes more time, then it takes more time. But let's say that for when you're key team players, it after this is all said and done, they don't have to say to themselves, "I never want to work for those people again." And the extra hour, the extra day, the extra week that it took to do one particular thing is worth it. Right. It's all worth it if the retention remains high because of the way that you treated the people. So, you know, I don't have any good tactical advice for people to make other than being like completely flexible, right? Like outside of like, well, I mean, really, no, completely flexible. You have people that are home like with their kids, like, all kinds of crazy stuff is going on in the background. Kids are throwing paint on the wall, food's hitting the floor
Are
and
you sharing a personal story here? Because I know you've been
actually,
home in quarantine with your children, working from
yeah,
home, so you get
some of it, yeah, I mean, but I mean, I'm something that's been thrown in our face. I'm really excited about is how do we treat the person who has a family? And we talked about all the other things like taking a break from work. Well, and it used to be like, let's say like a dog barked or somebody like talked while I was on a video conference, like pre-quarantine, right? Like me personally, I wouldn't be embarrassed because if they're like, oh, like, do you need a minute? And they were snarky about it, like one, I'm working with the wrong person. And two, like you can many cuss words. Like you can get away from me with that kind of attitude or feeling because like I have a family. So don't expect me to be like it's a really old school like in office type of thought process about how we make people feel about their work environment. That video, I don't know if I'm sure you've seen this, where the CNN correspondent is talking about South Korea and North Korea and his kids come like busting in the room and his wife is mortified and like she busts in the room and like snatches the children out and like tries to like she's like army crawling to like get these kids and the daughter she just walks in like a boss and starts playing with stuff and like but it was funny to us in the moment but the truth is that like we treat people like kids will never do that. Like your kids shouldn't be like they should be locked out of where you are and it's unprofessional or what have you. And it was funny to us in the moment because it was like, oh look how crazy and wrong this went. But the truth is like we we can't treat people that way.
Mhm.
We can't treat people like no, I think there's obviously boundaries, right? Like,
Sure.
if I'm like if my kids interrupt for a second, I'm like, "Hey, daddy's in a meeting. I need you all to be quiet." I think that that's completely acceptable for people to hear. If I'm like, "Hey, you know what? I got to postpone this meeting." Like if I have an infant and I'm like, "I have an infant. I have to go like feed them because they're more important to me than this 15-minute conversation."
Literally anything in the world.
Yeah, like but there was no space for that. And I think that hopefully that's been thrown in our face a lot more that, hey, we have to be okay with that. Like that being mortified that a meeting didn't go uninterrupted with my undivided attention because like, my kids are old enough, like they got into a fight upstairs. Like, I'm sorry, I gotta go break that up. Like, I gotta go like be like put some people in timeout. So you gotta wait a minute. Like
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah,
I could
hopefully that's been thrown in our face more.
I agree. I couldn't agree with you more. And it was coming onto my radar before the whole coronavirus thing, but I've said I have a few clients who have young infants, right? And I'm like, hey, I don't care if you need to feed your child, bring the baby. It's okay if they
Yeah, yeah.
cry. Like, we'll get through it. We can, put a little pin in the thing and let you deal with the baby. That's fine.
Yeah, and you know what? I don't want people to apologize.
No.
That's the thing that probably gets on my nerves the most when people feel they're like, "Oh, I'm so sorry," like, that they came in here and they did that thing. Like, I'm so sorry you feel the need to
Mhm.
apologize for that. Like, you have people that you have made or care for in general, and so, do that for a minute, and we'll get back to this when we need to.
Yeah. It's like we can start appreciating people for the whole picture of who
Yeah,
we are. It's many
yeah.
hats.
Yeah, maybe one day.
We're getting there. Seriously, even just us having this conversation, I think it's like we're paving the way.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, and it leads really nicely into a conversation about diversity, I think. People come from all kinds of different backgrounds, and I know about your work at Broadwing. You've mentioned it before, even in this conversation. You really value bringing people from diverse backgrounds to the table. So I would love to hear more about why that's so important to you. And I'd also love to spend a moment like, what is the ideal future here? What are we working towards when it comes to diversity?
Yeah, it's important to me to take it away from being a buzzword. It's a huge buzzword, not just, pre the situations that we have going on right now. It's like a thing that companies love to say and then be like, "Oh, well, it's so hard." And then we just let them off the hook when, they hire people from one group and, they're like, "Oh, well, we spent like a few $1,000s on it." And, it's really hard. And so I would love for it to come away from being a buzzword and, you know, um, an experience of my own is that I was working on some diversity efforts at a company one time. They're all about it and behind it, and they couldn't really get a good grasp on who was in charge of what, but um, and that kind of hurt the effort. But there was one opportunity I presented to them where I asked for some funding and some time from some teammates, and we would have had an exclusive group, um, an opportunity to host them at our office and whatnot. And this is like after so many conversations with leadership talking about how they want to, all this diversity and this, that, and the other. And their response was, "We don't have time, and we don't have the resources to give, to do this thing." Now that was extremely disheartening. It probably was the beginning of the end of my time there because it's, as you watch some of all the companies that I work with, I'm being ambiguous for a reason, but all the companies that I work with have raised hundreds of millions of dollars, and so you can't give 2 hours and a few $100s for pizza to have the target group that you want at your office and get a chance to possibly hire, to engage with this group and hopefully in the future hire some of these people. So, I think that some things that some of these companies don't see is how an action like that prevents them from actually being successful in their diversity efforts, right? They're like, "Oh, well, not this time. That time will come around again." No, it won't. No, it will not. Those people are moving on to other companies, who are going to accept them into their doors, who are not putting things above their priority. Somebody else is going to do a similar program, and the opportunity is lost.
Sure.
So you have to act on those unique opportunities in the moment, because you have to be competitive for diverse talent for sure.
Mhm.
Um, so it's important to me to get into why is diversity important to me. I want to get it away from being a buzzword. I want companies to really mean it, but also because uh, going back to the word, having some empathy. Now, being a person of color is one thing, an African American male, but I'm, honestly, like, I've experienced racism, I've experienced, bias and stereotypes, and that's all good and well. But honestly, like, I've pushed through it pretty well, and I could probably ignore a majority of stuff going on for the rest of my life, like, because like things are going well enough, from a company standpoint. I've built great relationships, and I have people around me that believe in me, and I work with groups of people who don't carry any of those biases or anything like that, right? Like I've created that ecosystem.
Mhm.
But now for me, it's important because of the people who I don't understand. people from the LGBTQ plus
Mhm.
community, women, um, minorities who come from countries that we overlook and have experiences that we overlook because it's very white, black to us here in America. And so, um, when I hear the discriminatory things that happen against those groups that I'm not a part of, the it really, like, it burns me up inside. I almost feel like I'm numb to the discriminatory things that happen for Black people in America. I know how to deal with that. I know how to compartmentalize it. I know how to, like, how to combat it.
Mhm.
To watch, a part of a community that I don't understand, but that I do believe has every single right to have every opportunity as much as I or anybody else in the organization. That's what I'm fighting for at this point. I don't know everything about what a woman in engineering is going through. I have no idea. I do. I hear awful stories. I hear things like, um, I hear about women being pushed more towards a design portion of a project. Oh well, like, do you know more about design? Just assuming because, like, it's I don't know, like a male engineer, just assuming that,
Yeah.
right? And so you push that person over to that portion of work, right? Oh well, you have like an eye for these things, right? It's all kind of coded language. You have an eye for these things, right? So let's say the person does go do that, and then let's say it's time for promotion up to someone to lead something that's more hardcore engineering. But you push that person to that other experience, and now they don't have that hardcore experience on this other portion of engineering because you said, "Oh, go do this design thing."
Yeah.
So now they're being passed over for promotion because you assumed that that's something. Maybe they just did it because they thought it was helping the team, but those kinds of things happen. And seeing those small things and trying to prevent them, you take your ass over there and do the design portion.
Right?
Like, don't derail somebody else's opportunity because you assume. And being comfortable with people coming from backgrounds that aren't Carnegie Mellon University, with 3 years at Facebook followed by 2 years at Google and a year on LinkedIn, at LinkedIn to boot, that if that's the only person that you're looking for, then all of them are going to look the same.
Mhm.
100% of them. And if you don't create training in your own organization that says, hey, these other engineering institutions or organizations, like, they are also engineering and we're willing to train them up to speed with what our standard is for engineering, then you're going to fail
Mhm.
from a diversity aspect. If you're not willing to say, to take a look at internally, because you have a legal team. I've interacted with some of these legal teams who are more concerned with protecting the organization from doing anything that might come off as getting them in hot water, that they're not willing to take a look at even their numbers internally. What do people identify as, to say where the problem is? um, then you're going to fail. You're just going to fail if you take these approaches. So if I'm passionate about it, because otherwise the haves and the have-nots remain separated
Yeah.
in the current scenario that we're living in.
Yeah. They do.
Yeah. Yeah. I see, for ourselves as a staffing organization, we can only be but so influential, though, in that. We have a tradition of presenting right around, we're a little lower than we were in the past, but right around 30%, 38% of our candidates historically have been from diverse backgrounds, which is really high in tech, I think, for, especially for a staffing firm. So we're trying to do everything that we can. But we also have to have open dialogue with hiring managers to say, hey, the thing that you're hitting this candidate on is taking away from the opportunity for you to get someone on your team that has a different perspective. And that can be really powerful for you.
Absolutely. And just to tie it into a couple themes we've already talked about, I'm hearing this need to slow down a little bit, get a little bit deeper in the questions that we're asking, rather than keeping diversity as like this superficial buzzword legal concern that needs to be dealt with on a very surface level in an organization, really being willing to take it deeper, to slow down with it, to look at how this is playing out in your organization so that you can do something meaningful about it. And there's also a level of emotional honesty that's needed there, right? Uh,
Yeah.
that's part of the pain I'm really seeing in this moment in history is that we're all required, if we're going to move forward together, to really open ourselves up to these layers of pain that other people feel that will allow us to then understand what they're going through so that we can do something about it, as opposed to just, you use the word compartmentalizing, and about, you know, the way that you relate to it as a survival mechanism. We all have to do that. It's a painful world that we live in a lot of ways, but we have to be willing to look at that a little bit deeper, I guess, is what I'm hearing from you. Am I hearing you right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, um, and that's why I was talking about, like being empathetic or sympathizing and trying to figure out what someone's going through. And I feel like we don't start there. It's very interesting to me. Some of the brightest people in the world can look at their team and be like, man, like, yeah, our process yielded the best and brightest. I'll be like really, really frank with that. Like, you look around your team and let's say that you do have, diverse individuals in your team. And let's say it's been like 10 years and the people that all rose to the top all look the same. You can't look back at your company and be like, you know why? That's because our process was perfect. Like, people were involved, personal bias, generally. And this goes back to, like I talked about, we were talking about experiences for myself in the Marine Corps, right? I ran a good physical fitness test, which, when you don't have other grades to go by, is the test in which people think whether or not you're a good Marine or not,
Mm,
right? So whether or not someone was going to perform better than me in the role didn't really matter, because the only thing that the first thing that happened to me was I did more pull-ups than anybody else. In the very first, like, this is how I became the guide of my platoon, which is like, the pretty much sets you up to be company honor graduate, or sets you at least to compete for company honor graduate. um, I did more pull-ups. Me and this other guy did the same amount of pull-ups out of the whole group, and I was taller than him,
hmm.
so I got picked. So, it's like literally bias on display. Like, he's bigger, maybe more intimidating. That's very Marine Corps. You're the guy. And that guy lost out. He didn't get the job. Like that. So, looking at that process, like, man, he might have crushed that job, man. He might have, like, and I don't like regret that it fell in my
I
favor,
mean, sure.
but um looking at that process and not being like, that seems flawed. Now, obviously there was no time to, like, and there's no way the Marine Corps is not looking at improving guide selection process, because you can, like, lose that job and, get fired from it or whatever. But what I'm saying is looking at a process and being like, hey, this is flawed, and we didn't do our best to get the best and brightest into our top positions, into leadership and et cetera. And thus, for, like, the ripple effect is that those families received less money over time, and those kids didn't see their parents succeed and grow to the highest levels, but the groups that all look like us all did. So, like, there's a ripple effect to these things, right? So I see I think that we don't start from a place of we start from a place of looking at everything through rose-colored glasses, that all is well and all is fine. And it's not. And then we turn that into, politicizing it again, of course, where we say, oh, well, if you're criticizing it, that means you hate it here. Like, well, what if my wife took that approach? What if, when I'm like, hey, like, the living room was, like, kind of dirty today, and she's like, you can get the hell out then. Like, you must hate it here. That's no, I just was thinking, like, do you have time? I'll vacuum it. Like, I'll improve. I just
Can we work together to make the
yeah,
living room cleaner?
yeah, let's figure this out together as a team and improve our environment. Like,
Yeah.
we got to change the approach. We got to get our living room clean, man.
Oh man, if we could spend 3 hours unpacking the metaphor of America as one big living room, that sounds like a whole
Yeah.
nother conversation. But
It's,
I have another question that's coming to mind about
yeah.
diversity and kind of unpacking diversity as a buzzword versus how we can be better about making that sentiment real in our lives. And I wonder, one of the things I've noticed in the public conversation lately when it comes to diversity, as it relates to the conversations we're having about systemic change and, racism, and how can we make things equitable for everyone through diversity. I've heard a lot of feedback, and at S.L.I.C.E we've been really sitting with this feedback of diversity isn't enough when it comes to meaningful change, and like the sentiment of, we don't want diversity, that's not the goal, we want systemic change that allows us to thrive, not just allows you to meet your marks type of a thing.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, that's what makes the road so long, right?
Hmm.
It's like um the system is built, and I think that, coming from my voice, people hear me and they immediately think that I'm talking about race. The system is built to lift up a set of people, mostly for people of color, right? It's because, like, historically, the groups that maybe inhibit progress were originally, like, built, like, there were laws, right? Anytime you have to, like, legalize a thing for a group of people to just do what the other people are doing, then, like, that thing kind of, like, has a lasting effect. Um my mother was, she informed, I thought this was just my oldest aunt, but my mother actually, schools were not completely desegregated by the time she was in elementary school. She was in the fourth grade before they closed the all black school in her
Wow.
area. So this is not like, I think people, it's funny what we put from a timeline perspective, right? They're like, oh, that was slavery. That was 400 years ago. It's like, yeah, no, yeah, well, no, right? Like my mother, who's alive today, lived through the kinds of policing and kinds of, like, educational segregation, things that, like, really separate people from the path to the ability to compete in a very, free market space, compete against their peer groups. So, you know, that's one thing. The system and the change that I just don't know how people can look at the setup and say to themselves, yeah, although women make up generally about half of our population, the fact that they don't make up really generally, if I'm being, I don't know, this is very broad to say, any of our leadership at a reasonable rate means that the system is just selecting the best and brightest of us all. First of all,
Clearly.
first of all, uh, the reasons why that can't possibly be the case is because I know many women, including my wife, who outperform me in infinite ways. and and that's not like me, like, giving some ground to a foe. She's just better than me. All right, she's just like, she, like, the finite, like, being very rigid and all that stuff. Like I said, she would make phenomenal marine. She just is better. And so I'm glad that in her hospital system now she's, like, in a position of leadership, and that's great. But in some, in nursing, right, in nursing, like, the promotion of women it's like a natural thing, right? I want that to be natural for all industries. And so, it's like, yeah, like you said, diversity is not just the goal, but to have the natural progression and competition between people not ever fall on that one person is taller than another. It would be ideal. Um, and I don't, it feels like such a long road, but I think that what people are saying right now is kind of enough is enough. Looking back at the Me Too movement, people standing up, which I'm really proud of, for people to stand up and say, "Hey, I'm not going to get treated I'm not going to accept this treatment to advance my career. I'm not going to accept this treatment generally, right? Um, and for for me as a male, for that moment, and I hope that this is what people are doing in this particular moment. For me, in that moment, it was important to me to say, who are the women that I interact with all the time? I know something that I do very frequently. I talk over people. I talk over not just women. I just talk over people, right? Like that's one thing the Marine Corps gave to me. Like I'm like I can speak quicker and louder than you, right? Like, but I had to stop and ask myself, like, do I do that in a conversation? Is it in a meeting? Am I repurposing a woman's words to sound like they're my own? And I got really nervous about that, because I think that there's some times where I've not been completely guilty of it, but at least like speaking over someone and not letting their voice be heard, and and then following along, following their lead. If there's anything that I'm like in those instances, because I've been bred, like like I said, like I got an opportunity to be a leader in the Marine Corps. Well, being a leader in those instances kind of makes you sometimes a bad follower, and
Mm-hmm.
learning, I like. I'll speak broadly again. I don't care. But men oftentimes, like, we don't know how to just follow women.
Mm-hmm.
To just listen and let that other person lead. We can be really bad at that. So I think that what people are saying right now is that for an infinite amount of situations and scenarios, that there needs to be really drastic change, and it's going to be painful, and we're going to open up a bunch of wounds, and we're going to talk about it, and we're going to fight for diversity and equality and equity, in a way that doesn't say you need to wait anymore. Um, and I'm excited about that, and I'm willing for myself personally. Like I said, like I talk about being a person of color, but for me, and I want other people to do right now is challenge yourself to look at the groups that you're not a part of and make sure that you're making space for them in your environment. I don't know what all that means, and what that takes for everybody. But like I said, I harp on for myself, talking to people from different communities that I am not a part of very frequently, um, and engaging with them and trying to figure out how spaces can be more accommodating for them. The space is fine for me. I'm having a great time, but
Well, I'm glad that you
yeah,
are.
I think that we can do a better job in general with that.
Thank you very much for doing the work that you need to do to make that space for other people. I hope that many people listening to this are doing the same thing.
It's a journey, it's a journey. It's not something like I'm perfect at. But I always think about situations and scenarios where you come into like a team environment. Now with my company, like I'm the founder, I'm the CEO, right? Like when somebody speaks, like I might be like, yeah, we're not going to do that. But that's like my job, right? Is like the decision maker, but I still have to hear. I should hear and listen. So it's a long journey, and it's, I think people, they want it to be some finite answer, and it's just not. It's
Mm,
just not. It's going to take time, and it's going to take change for people.
yeah, it's an ongoing conversation. Like it might never stop. We've talked about criticism and change making a lot in this conversation, and we want it to be quick. You said something about earlier, I forget the context exactly, but if we're criticizing something, that must mean we don't love it, as far as an organization goes, I think. And like, what if we flipped that on its head and said, if we care enough to look deeply at the situation to find any way we can possibly make this better and more able to thrive, because any organization or group of people, I believe, is going to be better suited to thrive if the individuals are set up to thrive.
Yeah,
You
I agree with that. I think what we were talking about there, the context, like when we look at the country, when people criticize the country or an organization, you know, like the old "if you don't love it, leave it," which is the
Mhm.
dumbest thing I've ever heard. it's it's so dumb. I you can love many things like you don't give up on relationships like that. I don't love everything about every single one of my friends. I don't love everything about, my significant other. I love her. I don't love every single thing about her. It's unrealistic, right? Like she was going through a real chocolate eating phase in the bed. And we had to talk about that.
Not your favorite.
Yeah, I know a lot of people are probably going to hear that and be like, "Yeah, that's about you. It's not about her." But like that was challenging, and I didn't love that, but I still love her.
And doesn't want chocolate in his
Yeah,
bed. I think it's okay.
like I just don't. Never resonates with me. If you don't love it, leave it. Now, if you hate everything, you should leave, right? Like you should leave that situation because it's not healthy for you, right? Like
Right.
if it's hurtful, if it's whatever those things are. But that never resonates with me. If you don't love it, leave it. Like I'm not criticizing it because I don't love it. I'm criticizing like I don't criticize my son because I want to leave him. I criticize,
No.
I criticize him because I want to. I'm critical of him because I want to help him be prepared for the next thing that's coming in his life. Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, a lot of work to do.
We want it to be the best it can possibly
Yeah,
be.
work
That
environments.
involves a lot of work.
Yeah, all of that.
You and I, we went to high school together. I don't know if we've mentioned that yet. Maybe we did. I know I'm living currently in the town where we went to high school, which is in upstate New York. And I know that you are super passionate about this area. And I guess I'm coming around to it too. We'll say that it's a beautiful, beautiful area, but it's never been clear to me how many conversations we need to have here about race. And, that is a huge topic in our country right now, but this is not a very diverse area. And I'm not sure if you've noticed this, but I've noticed a lot of perspectives that in our area that are very limited. People might not necessarily get all of the arguments that are being made. It's something that they've never experienced before. So I wonder if we can talk a little bit about that. I wonder if there's anything about your experience as an African American man growing up here that you would want to share with our listeners.
Yeah, yeah. So, the first thing is that for an area where it's not very diverse, right? Other people's problems aren't able to shape perspective. So, like I related to myself like interacting with the LGBTQ plus community that growing up very conservative Christian, I was taught that this is a community that's wrong, evil, worse words,
Mhm.
right, than that. And then I met people. Well, first of all, that meant that the people that I grew up with that are from that community had to hide because of where we're from, right? So that meant that they would not be generally accepted. And then, now that I know them as adults, I kind of hurt for that experience for them,
Yeah.
right? Because they were not visible, so that meant that they didn't exist, and that meant that they were not people. And it turns out they are some of the freaking best people I know. And but without being shown who they truly are, I couldn't appreciate that. And so, without when it comes to diversity and being a person of color in a small town like that, then you are the only example for those people. And people will say things like, "Well, I never saw any racism going on," which is an interesting take because I wonder if people think that like racist acts are always like some overt thing. Like you never. It's very
Like they
interesting.
happen on the
Yeah,
stage.
yeah, like, that's racism up there, on the stage, and I can call it out and get the cops over here. Racism handled, done and done. So it doesn't happen like that. It happens with, riding your bike down the town or down the street and somebody driving by in a truck and yelling the N word at you. It happens with, being told that you can't come to a place because somebody there doesn't like black people. It happens with someone making a comment when you're running on the track that, like, of course all those white boys are chasing you because you're the black guy. Those are the things that happen. It happens with when you're playing on a sports team that, there are certain other schools and towns that you're going to go to and play against where they're going to yell racial things at you. And all those things happen from, the moment that you're born and all the way up until you graduate and leave that area. And then you watch the people from that area go, I never saw any racism. And you're like, well, you don't have to assume that there was racism, but before you say that, maybe you could ask somebody about their experience, right?
Yes.
And so it there's no context for the person who doesn't start from a place of asking first what someone's experience is and taking it for what it is. We're really, really bad about that in this country in general. One of my
Hmm.
biggest things that I completely hate is that someone who's a victim of this, there's no greater mirror to me than when someone is a victim of sexual assault, what we put them through here. So if we can't believe that person really at scale, you have men that are willing to be like, "Oh well, so many women lie about that." Are you out of your mind? Are you out of your mind? Right? So we don't believe that. We don't believe if I told someone all the things that just happened. Those are just some of the things that happened to me personally.
So, just to be clear, racism exists here in this small town.
Oh yeah, yeah. So and if you were to ask, generally speaking, actually, all of the black people that I grew up with or around in our hometown area have similar experiences.
Mhm.
So, it's not like I think people want to put it off like, oh, well, that maybe that was just like a one-off, and then it comes down to other things. I remember, I remember in elementary school, this kid wanted to be in the front of the line, and he like pushed this girl. She was black and called her the N-word. This is elementary school, Irwin Valley,
Yeah.
and you know, so I mean, not only does it happen, is it there? Um, but it's a problem because that's it's something that a population that's within your population is having to live with and guide around. Now, the next thing that people say is, well, it's just words, and the punishment. This is something that I've been thinking about a lot. Is that the punishment, and I know that I'll have to go through this with my kids. Is that let's say somebody retaliates to that to being called such a thing. If you retaliate, then you'll be punished alongside that person who was willing to invoke, that you are different because of the way you were born. But if I retaliate against that, then I'm punished too, right? Everybody receives a punishment. There's no further punishment for the person that is willing to look at my skin color and degrade me. There's nothing further. There's no investigation into why that's happening, or some sort of conversation with parents at another level. Now, I my caveat to that is I had phenomenal teachers. Some I had some phenomenal teachers.
Yep.
One specifically that I always think about were principals, Mr. Rossi at Northside Blodgett and Mike Janowski when he was principal at West High.
Mhm.
Now, three separate, three specific, maybe four specific instances that these individuals went out of their way to make sure that there was nothing of the like going on that they didn't know about. So, on one instance, had Mr. Rossi, two instances, Mr. Rossi pulled myself, I think Adam, a couple of other, so my best friend Adam, and a couple of other people in, all of us black, and he asked us flatly, is anybody treating you different because of the color of your skin? And there were some instances, for sure, he was pissed, for sure. And some of those things were talked about or handled, and he went out of his way to make sure that the environment continued to be safe and that those things were dealt with. I think he did that like twice. Mr. Janowski, when this web, the internet was like happening as we were growing up. this thing called schoolscum.com came out. Remember
Oh,
that?
yes, I remember
Yeah.
schools.
Schoolscum.com drops. I wasn't even on it. Like we were poor. We didn't really have like I had the original like AOL. I was still hitting the dial tone, like net zero. I don't even know what we had. It was crazy. But
Sure.
like, I was still like just trying to be on AOL Instant Messenger and talk to girls, right? So I wasn't really concerned about other sites.
Mhm.
Um, and it's funny, like people like there's no racism, it's no racism. As soon as there's like a web platform, the first things that happen are like racism, sexism, like right away, like homophobia, like immediately, right?
Sure.
So I don't even know much about this site. I've heard about it a little bit. um, Mr. Janowski pulls us in and he's like, have you guys been on this site? I've heard that there are some bad things going on. We're trying to track it. Like he was proactive in making sure that these things were not happening to us. And then on another instance, pull us in to have a conversation to ask us if people were treating us different. Now, that I carry with me today. Actually, Mike Janowski very recently retired as superintendent.
Oh, wow.
I made a quick video, and I wish I had an opportunity to say more to him. Obviously the pandemic didn't prevent that, and hopefully I get a chance to run into him in the future to let him know how much of an impact that had on me. That even though people were going to treat me different, that there were people that were going to say absolutely not,
Yeah.
and that were going to stand up for me, and how much that means for me now today to have faith in America, to have faith in our, that there are people that stand with me, not against me, just because of the color of my skin. So, that if there's nothing that tells you that racism is more real, that educators are having to take time out of their day, not just educators, principals of schools are having to take time out of their day to investigate, then I don't know what will. What will make it real for you? Um, I don't know what makes it real um, to people in our hometown. I love our hometown. I love where we're from. And I love it because of that particular moment in time where it seems like Corning was doing really well, for our age range, prior to 2000, 2001. And, I grew up with people from all different walks of life, and a lot of them embrace each other, still to this day. So, I'll always have love for upstate New York. I don't know if I can ever move there because taxes, but taxes and like it's a crazy place, man. Like upstate's very interesting, but my love for it, I don't know, something about where you're from, and just want some good pizza. I just want just want to walk the glass museum. I just want to, those things are just in me. I want to go to Cuca Lake. I miss those things.
Yeah. Well, we miss you too. And I'm so grateful to hear that although there were certainly no shortage of instances where you felt racism present in our area, I'm so grateful that you had that additional experience of there are people here who will defend me and who do care.
And that taught me so much. It taught me to stand up for people, right? Like I now that's who I try to be. I try to be, going to the Marine Corps is a big part about trying to stand up for people who might not have someone to stand up for them. And I'm not
Mhm.
saying I execute that perfect, but that's a big part of what I try to do, starting from a place of empathy. Those principals were white guys. What the hell do they care what's going on with that, other than if their incentive maybe was not to get their school on the news. But I don't think that doesn't seem to me with where their motives were. Their
Yeah.
motives were to keep their schools safe and fair and equitable for everybody. And man, if that didn't have a lasting impact on me to say, yeah, I don't know all of these groups and these people, but if I get an opportunity, I'm gonna try to stand up for them. One last little bit on that, the impact that it had on me. Um, Don't Ask, Don't Tell was repealed while I was in the Marine Corps.
Hmm.
So I don't know if people already forgot, like, but there was a time like Don't Ask, Don't Tell basically meant that like if you were found to be a homosexual in the military, then you could, be kicked out, right? Is basic. But if if no one would ask you, that's basically what it was. Don't ask, don't tell. Don't ask of someone's sexual orientation, and don't tell anybody your sexual orientation, and we won't have any problems, right? So you couldn't be an openly gay serving person. You couldn't go and die for your country as an openly gay person or transgender or anything like that, right? Anything in that particular community, you know, not allowed. So during the Obama administration, that was repealed. I remember a bunch of like generals came to our base, and they and I was really starting to understand the oppression on this group of people more and more, mostly because of the Marine Corps, right? The words used against to call something feminine, calling it gay, those things, it really started to eat at me that we're really actually talking about people when we're using these words. And so there was a forum held, and as anybody on base could come to it. It was in this gymnasium, and you could come and you could, hear about what the plans were. So they were asking us like, well, how do you feel about repealing Don't Ask, Don't Tell? And I think they were just trying to gauge the temperature of that, which is crazy, right? It's crazy to think, again, we're talking about legalizing, legislating, being you. And so what I was able to do was have a or I was able to have time on the microphone to say how I felt. And a point I made was there was a woman sitting next to me, a female Marine, and there's myself. There's hundreds of Marines in this auditorium at the time. But the point I made was that there was a time when I wouldn't be able to serve with this person sitting right next to me. There was a time when not only was the military segregated, but also there was a time when Black people weren't allowed in at all, right? And then also for women, very small portions, all non-combat, but we definitely wouldn't be able to even be sitting here next to each other. And so to prevent some other group from being able to do what we're doing here today seems like nonsense to me. All right. So I get done with my time on the microphone. I'm leaving the building, and some very senior Marine, at least a gunnery sergeant, he might have been a master sergeant. Nah, he was a gunnery sergeant, 2 stripes down, approaches me, and he's like, "You don't compare those people to Black people and to women." And basically, what he was saying, he was dehumanizing basically the comparison that I made, that he was dehumanizing gay people, that they're not a group to be compared with other people that have their rights. Now, that was kind of scary because I think at the time, I don't even think I was a corporal. This person was pretty high ranking, but they had no power in that moment. It was just a random gunnery sergeant who was displeased with what I said, and he was telling me, "Well, you got to be careful with that. You can't compare those people to those people." And I actually stood pretty firm. I'm proud. Like if I look back at a moment, that I'm pretty proud. I was like, that's my opinion. I do think that all of those folks should be able to openly serve with who they are. But I think about Mike Janalski taught me how to stand up for somebody who wasn't me. And so, although we do have racism and sexism, and it's just not completely going away, and we do have those things in these areas. We need to accept that they're real and try to fight them, but we really need more Mike Janalskis out there who will teach us how to stand up for other people.
One of the questions I had earmarked to ask you is, how are you focused on showing up for people right now? What would you love to see more of from the people in your community, or just, all of us? What would you love to see more of from people right now when it comes to showing up for our fellow humans?
That's a lot right now. We have two really huge things happening at the same time. Um,
Mhm.
I think that on the pandemic side, I think it's important that we support our healthcare workers, the research that's going on, and like I unfortunately waded into the misinformation conversation the other day. It's absolutely futile. People that want there to be conspiracy, will believe those things, but those things are hurtful. My wife goes into that hospital every weekday. The doctors that are there, the nurses that are on the floor that are taking care of these patients, the last thing that they really need is people at home doubting them. And we've seen people turn on that community when they're out there protesting, staying at home. And I get that this is really challenging, and it's worse for a lot of people. It's worse for some than it is for others. But I think keeping a level head, the best that we possibly can, is really important right now. Trusting in the science and finding ways to adapt. All of us have to find a way to adapt. I personally, I might have to homeschool my kids so that my wife can go to work, and I'll be a complete
Mhm.
stay-at-home dad, right? And that is not like everything that I want right now from my time, because it's cutting into my like bourbon drinking and skiing and all that time. But that's just what I'm gonna have to do. Um, I think we all have to find a way to adapt, do something different. If it's a work thing, maybe you have to change your skill set. Do whatever's in your power right now to just keep things rolling. We can get through this, but we have to follow some guidelines together and not call it anything crazy, because every bit of misinformation makes somebody believe that they can go outside of these, like the situation at hand. And we're seeing people you know have these parties or something like that, and it's costing people their lives. So that to me is not starting from a place of empathy, for sure. It's just not. And now on
No.
the other side, with the conversation around race at the moment, I'm pleading with people who don't have, my viewpoint, to consider that the life that they have lived is not the same as somebody else's. That's all I absolutely ask. When I think about, going through these movements and these moments, you have to consider that the life you've lived is not the same as somebody else's. And I would just love, if there's anything I would like the most, is that we stop having to have these moments and movements, and just make it,
Mhm.
something that's a part of our lives, that we are going to have drastic
Mhm.
change. We're going to have change for these groups. We're not going to legislate against people. We're not going to make legislation we're not going to vote in a way, we're not going to legislate in a way, we're not going to act in a way that takes away from somebody else's experience, and doesn't make the playing field as equal as it possibly can be. I still believe in what we're doing here, this great experiment. I love, I wouldn't, um, I wouldn't want to trade my experiences for growing up in any other country, any other situation. Um, and I want to keep working on it. And that doesn't mean I hate it. It means I love it more.
Amen. Like, what can I even say? That's beautiful. And Kenyon, there are just so many more questions. I could spend another 3 hours asking you questions. This has been such a great conversation, and I appreciate having you here. I know that we are nearing the time that you will need to leave me, and I have a little surprise round of like rapid fire questions that I would like to ask you.
Oh boy. Okay.
Just a little something fun.
Sure.
So, what is your morning drink?
Water first, then coffee.
Love it. And hot coffee, I know.
Always hot coffee. Yep.
Do you take it with cream and sugar? How do you take your coffee?
CEOs drink black coffee.
I love it.
I saw that somewhere. It's completely untrue, but but that's like swayed how I drink the coffee. So,
Perfect. How about your happy hour drink?
big bourbon person. So usually an old fashioned.
Love it. And you like to make your own.
Love to. Got to be Big Rock, Woodford Reserve, maybe Breckenridge bourbon. Breckenridge is what I keep in the house. Angel's Envy, or Basil Hayden, something like that.
I think we could have a whole 3 hour conversation just about bourbon and
Yeah.
maybe someday. So, what music are you listening to right now?
Um, a lot of like throwback stuff, because I found my old iPod, and I found the cord to charge it. But I
Amazing.
mean, a lot of the stuff I listen to right now is like very instrumental, like hip hop, jazz.
Okay. Any specific artist or anything that I can explore? Because that's amazing.
Well, one particular artist it's not hip hop jazz, but there's a lot of stuff I listen to that's like offshooting, is like I keep Black Bear on my Pandora list. That's something I listen to him like all the time.
Love it. Thank you. So how about a podcast? What's your favorite podcast?
Always Gary V.
Okay.
Um, if I'm gonna be listening to podcasts and I need the energy, then I mean, you really can't go wrong. Like you can find one that fits what you're looking for. You can find an episode of his.
I love Gary V. He's great. How about a book? What are you reading right now?
Um, Wine and Spirits, 2020. I'm legit like just studying my cocktail manual because, like when people come over, like I love to make a phenomenal drink. I'm legitimately just reading it. That and ooh, quick plug, Melissa
Yes.
Santel's new book. What is it called? I have it like on my next to my kitchen because I'm like trying to pick out what I'm gonna make out of it. Do you know what it's called? We have to.
I don't. It's a cookbook though,
Oh,
right?
it's called Hi, I'm Hungry. Yeah,
Hmm.
like it's everything. It's really well written. I try to support people that like are from our hometown doing their own business thing, and I'm really impressed with her work here. It looks like she does food photography. But Hi, I'm Hungry. Man, it's like you can order it from her site, I think, and it's really good. It's written like a story on food, and I'm hungry just thinking about it.
Very cool. I'll make sure to add links to all of this in the show notes if anybody is looking for that information. And what's your favorite color?
Red. Hmm. Yeah, trying to lean into that more.
I love it. Lean into it. Surround yourself with it. I love doing that. What are your words to live by? Is there a phrase you're always saying to people?
Um, like the saying yes thing is important to me, like we talked about. Um, man, just have an absolute good time because you only have but one time to do this thing. And for me, if I can have everybody else around me having that same kind of good time, man, I can die happy. I just say yes to the dress, girl. Get out there. Do your thing. Like, just say yes, man. Like, just try everything. I can't like say enough about that. That's a whole nother podcast right there.
Well, hopefully we'll have another opportunity sometime in the future because I know I enjoyed this so much and I can't think of a better note to end on. So,
No, thank you so much for having me. This was great.
absolutely, I agree.
Cheers.
Okay, guys, so that's it. That's the interview with Ken Hicks. I hope that you found it as enlightening as I am and continue to. Has me thinking so much about criticism and the way that I'm using criticism in my life and the amount of empathy that I'm bringing to the table. And it has me thinking a lot about hard conversations and how we all, myself first, need to get better at having these conversations. And I hope that you find this episode to be full of tips that you can use to move the needle in your personal and professional lives, as well as, an interesting place, an open place to have these hard conversations. I know after editing this and listening to myself talking with Ken about things like racism and, men and women and all of these hot topics that we're surrounded with on a day to day basis. I already see so many things in hindsight that I would want to do differently with the conversation, and I think that that's always the case. But I love the takeaway that we can start and do things imperfectly. And I really look forward to getting better at having these difficult conversations through having this podcast and making it for you, and I hope that you'll join me in having some of those conversations yourself. I would love to hear how it goes for you, and I will see you in the next episode. I can't wait. I hope that you will follow along wherever you love to receive your content. We're on YouTube. If you want to find shorter clips of this interview, I've, taken a few out and made videos of them. They're up on YouTube. And yeah, there's a lot more to come. So I hope that you'll stick around. Make sure to connect with Ken and check out the show notes for all the different resources that we mentioned and ways to get in touch with him. And thank you so much for listening. I'll see you next time.